Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Baiju's Exam Prep. Welcome to the very first class for international relations. In this particular subject, we shall be studying India's foreign policy in complete detail. The subject of international relations, or as we call it, IR, is a very interesting and a dynamic subject as it is based on the geopolitics of the world. As we are going to study India's foreign relations with other countries, naturally the subject happens to be very, very interesting. It's also a very important part of your exams. The subject itself is largely mains oriented. It's extremely important for your mains exam, where you can get 4 questions in GS paper 2. First, let me help you understand the significance of the subject before we start with the first class. You're going to get 4 questions for around 50 marks in GS paper 2. But the importance of IR does not end over here. Apart from these questions that come under international relations, there could be other related questions in other subjects, because IR is very closely linked with many other subjects which is part of your GS syllabus. IR is a multidisciplinary subject. It is closely connected with modern history, with post-independence history, with geography, with polity and economy, with environment ecology, disaster management, science and technology. So IR shares connections with all these subjects across GS paper 1, paper 2 and paper 3. For example, take internal security, where we study India's security issues under GS paper 3. The subject of internal security is closely connected with international relations. Topics like terrorism, border management, cybersecurity, money laundering, all these topics in internal security are directly linked with international relations. So whatever we study here will help you in many other questions as well in the other subjects across paper 1, paper 2 and paper 3. Other than that, you're going to get 4 direct questions in paper 2 as part of international relations. You can even anticipate a essay topic. Previously, we have got essay topics related to international relations. So you can get an entire essay topic for 125 marks in your mains. That is why the subject is very, very important. The subject is also extremely important for your prelims. Even in prelims, we can expect a lot of questions from IR. But of course, this varies from year to year. For example, this year and last year, these were good years for IR. We got around 13 to 14 questions just from international relations and current affairs based on international relations. But sometimes you might get, let's say, 8 questions or just 5 questions. Or in a worst year, you might get 0 questions as well. There is no set number for your prelims, right? Prelims is very dynamic that way. But you can, on an average, expect 5 to 8 questions in prelims as well, which is connected to current affairs of international relations, based on international groupings, based on important places that are in news, right? On all these topics, a lot of prelims questions can be asked. Anywhere between 3 questions going all the way till 13, 14 questions can be expected in your prelims. So this clearly makes the subject extremely important for our exams, be it for mains, be it for prelims, and of course for your interview. The subject is extremely important. So today we will begin with the first module, where we shall first understand the syllabus for this subject. When you start a new subject, the first step is to analyze the syllabus given by UPSC, because that is how we'll understand which topics to study, which topics not to study, right? Because these subjects are very vast. So to figure out which topics are relevant for the exam, we need to first understand and analyze the syllabus. I'll explain the approach that we are going to take in class, how we are going to cover the syllabus given by UPSC, and then we are going to start with few basic introductory concepts. Before we get into the core topics, I would like to cover some basic concepts that lay the foundation for international relations. And then we shall be starting with India and its neighborhood. This is what we have on the agenda for today's class. Is that clear? So let's begin. Let's start by talking about the syllabus that UPSC has given for international relations. As I was mentioning, it's part of GS paper 2. As far as your mains exam is concerned, if you look at the syllabus, it's part of GS paper 2. After polity, governance, and social justice, at the end, you have these 4 topics that are mentioned under GS paper 2. So essentially, we are going to study India's relations with major countries, including our neighboring countries. We will focus on our immediate neighbors with whom we share land boundaries and maritime boundaries. We will discuss India's bilateral relations with major powers from around the world, from Indian Ocean, from Southeast Asia, from West Asia, Central Asia. Essentially, from across the world, we'll pick some important regions. We'll understand India's approach towards those regions. We'll select some important countries and we'll understand our bilateral ties with them. We're also going to study a number of regional and global groupings and key agreements that India would have signed. We'll focus on some important organizations like SARC, BIMSTEC, IORA, Quad, SCO, BRICS, G20, right? Then European Union, ASEAN. There are many such organizations which are relevant in geopolitics. We're going to cover the most important ones, and we'll understand how the policies of other countries, how does it affect India? The policies of other countries, other developed and developing nations, will affect India's interests. For example, the visa policy of US will affect Indian students and Indian professionals. The border policy of China will have an impact on India's border security and national security, right? So we'll study the policies of other countries as well if they are affecting India's core interests. Then we also have to study the role of Indian diaspora, the role of Indian community abroad. In almost every country, there is a strong Indian community. You have non-resident Indians who are Indian nationals who are settled in foreign countries. Either they are studying, they're working, right? So they form a connection between India and the other country, right? And there could be people of Indian origin. There would be Indians who would have migrated many generations ago. And the current generations who are living abroad, they still share a connection with India, cultural link with India. Even though they're not Indian citizens, they might have taken up citizenship of another country. Still, they have a cultural bond with the country. So the Indian community abroad plays a very big role. They contribute to our Indian foreign policy, right? And the Indian government also has an obligation to look after the safety and well-being of the Indian community in other countries. So this is also an important topic, along with some important international institutions and agencies. So broadly, this is the syllabus that UPSC has prescribed for us. These are the major topics. Now, what I'll be doing is, I'll adopt a slightly different approach to cover the syllabus. If we go in this order given by UPSC, it might become a little challenging for some students. So to simplify the process of understanding international relations, I'll be adopting a region-based approach. We'll pick up different regions of the world and then focus on India's relations with those regions. And we'll pick out some countries and some groupings from each region. This is essentially a geography-based approach to IR. Because please understand that international relations is heavily influenced by geography. Geography of a place plays a direct role in determining the international relations of that place. So what I'll do is we'll break down the world into different regions. We'll start with our own neighborhood where India is located, that is South Asia. First, we will cover all our neighboring countries, all the major neighbors of India with whom we share direct boundaries. Then we shall take a look at the Indian Ocean region. We'll understand India's policy towards Indian Ocean. We'll pick up some important countries and understand What relations do we have with this region? What priorities do we have? What initiatives has India taken up? What's the role of the Indian community in this region, the Indian diaspora in this region, right? What are the major groupings present in this region? All those topics will get covered under one single region itself. Similarly, we'll look at Southeast Asia, East Asia, and the larger Indo-Pacific. We'll cover West Asia and Central Asia. So once we cover these important regions, and under each region, we'll discuss few important bilateral ties. We'll discuss some important groupings and organizations of that region. We'll also discuss the contribution, the role of the Indian community in that particular region. All of this will be included as part of this discussion itself. This will be a more comprehensive discussion, a region-based discussion. Once we complete this, we'll pick up the major powers, the global powers like US and Russia. And we'll also look at some other important regions such as Europe, Africa, and Latin America. Just a brief look. We need to briefly understand what policies do we have towards Africa, Latin America, and Europe. We'll take a brief look at this. And throughout the course of the discussion, we will be covering many groupings and organizations. Is that clear? I'm going to include all these other topics as part of the region-based discussion itself. So this will be the approach that we are going to take in class. And I want to make this very clear at the beginning. Now, before we start with some basic concepts, obviously, you guys will have a doubt. Like, how should you prepare? What material should you read? Should you make notes? Right? Let me answer all those questions quickly. What sources should you refer? What should be your reading material? See, this is a very dynamic subject. Of course, there is a static part. There is a lot of background that is involved. But there is a very big dynamic part. The subject itself is very, very dynamic. It's heavily influenced by current affairs. Current affairs has a huge impact on this subject. In fact, the subject keeps evolving every single day. What I teach you today might become outdated by tomorrow. Let's say today I've explained about India's relations with, let's say, China, right? But within a day, there can be such big changes that the whole explanation might turn upside down. So you have to constantly stay updated. That is the challenge in this subject. Otherwise, it's a very easy and interesting subject. So the base reading material, the basic foundational material for you should be the class PPTs that I am sharing with you. As much as necessary, I'll keep the PPTs detailed with all the relevant points, maps, data, etc. The PPTs which are being shared with you, right? That will be your basic material along with the classroom discussion that we are going to have. Please remember, the discussion will be analytical. I'll focus more on analysis because that is what UPSC expects from you, to build your own opinions, to have the ability to critically analyze a topic. Factual information anyone can learn, anyone can by heart. Of course, facts are important, but facts are not everything in this exam. Analysis, critical thinking is what will help you succeed in this exam. So the discussion in the class will be largely analytical. We'll have a very comprehensive discussion on all the topics so that you are in a position to form your own opinions. Of course, I'll be covering a lot of facts as well. So in the class, I expect all of you to make short notes. This is your responsibility, right? Don't expect spoon feeding. We are not in school anymore, right? Keep a book for IR, and as and when we discuss, when I mention a key point, right, I'll highlight the point as well. I'll repeat if you want. I'll slow down if you want. But it will be your responsibility to make short notes, to make quick notes of some of the key points. So the PPT and the short notes becomes your foundational material. Along with that, we'll be sharing some static notes. For every module, some static notes will be given. There is the additional reading material also which is shared with you. So this becomes your basic reading material. Is that clear? You don't really have to rely on any textbook as such. One book will not help you cover this subject. It is such a vast and dynamic subject. You can't simply rely on just one textbook in the market. Is that clear? So please focus on the class discussion, make your short notes, make use of the PPTs and the other additional notes we are going to share with you. That is more than sufficient. Got it? But if you need some reference reading, if you need some additional background, if you're interested in the subject, then pick up any good book in the market. Any good book which is available, it's up to you, right? I would recommend the book by either Rajiv Sikri or VP Dutt. Both are very good books, very small books as well. You can read it like a novel, like a storybook, and highlight some key points. Then you don't have to go back and read this again. This is only for foundational reading. Even if you skip this, it is fine. But just if you want some additional content, if let's say you want additional reference reading, these are the books I would refer. Rajiv Sikri's Challenge and Strategy and VP Dutt's Indian Foreign Policy. They are available in the market, right? If you're interested, go for it. Or else, if you don't want, skip it. Still, the class notes, the PPTs are more than sufficient. So this material is enough till the classes are going on. What will you do after the classes end? Right? That's where the current affairs comes in. I told you the subject is dynamic. It keeps evolving and changing. In the class, I'll ensure that the discussion is up to date. Let's say today we're discussing something. I'll ensure it is as up to date as possible. Let's say there was a development yesterday. I'll ensure I'll include that in the discussion. But what will you do after the classes? You will still have many more months before your exam, right? So this is where you constantly update yourself through current affairs. Make use of our daily news analysis, the news analysis that we provide on YouTube, the comprehensive news analysis that we publish on the website, the weekly webinars every Tuesday and Thursday, the monthly magazine which is provided to you. That becomes your primary reading material, right? Other than that, it's always good to read newspapers on your own as well. If you have developed that habit, well and good. Any one newspaper is enough. If you don't want to rely on ready notes, you're always welcome to read the paper on your own. That is any day a better approach. All right, either Hindu or Indian Express, one of them. Both are equally good. They cover IR topics very well. Then follow the website of Ministry of External Affairs and the social media handles of MEA. MEA is very active on social media, on YouTube, on Twitter, Instagram, right? Because you'll get updates on India's foreign policy. You'll get updates about visit of foreign leaders, if Indian leaders visit abroad, right? Or if key agreements are signed. All updates are available on MEA's website. Visit the website, navigate through the website, see if any relevant content can be found. Follow the social media handles. That will give you a lot of important updates. Other than that, I would suggest that you can follow a couple of think tanks. Think tanks, they conduct academic research in the field of geopolitics and foreign policy. There are two think tanks in India which do incredible work in the field of foreign policy and geopolitics. One is ORF, the Observer Research Foundation, and the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. These are two major think tanks based out of India. They bring former diplomats, former military and intelligence officers. They bring strategic experts, journalists, all of them together, right? And they conduct a lot of discussions, debates. They bring out these in-depth research articles, which they publish on their websites and social media handles. So follow these think tanks, maybe on a weekly basis. Try and read 2 articles. You don't have to read everything that they publish. That is impossible to cover, right? You can't give all the time just for IR. Weekly, maybe give 20 to 30 minutes time. Visit the website of ORF and IDSA. Maybe pick up 1 or 2 good articles. That is more than enough. Just 2 articles per week. That will give you a lot of content and it will give you expert insight. You'll develop in-depth understanding of a topic and you can start framing your own opinions. That is the advantage of reading such good articles. All right, this is all you have to do for current affairs. Now, let's say someone doesn't have the time to do this. Let's say you're a working professional or you can't understand the Hindu or Indian Express on your own. Even then, it is fine. You don't have to worry about all this because we are already providing you all the ready material through monthly magazine, weekly webinars, and the daily Hindu analysis, the daily news analysis. We are providing you all the ready content to you. Just follow that regularly, right? So it's up to you how you are going to approach current affairs. This is what I would recommend. So if you're able to do this, this is more than sufficient. Is that clear? Don't go beyond this. Don't accumulate every book in the market, every notes in the market. You'll be wasting your time. It's always better to read the same material again and again. Multiple revisions is what will help you in this exam, not reading multiple books and not reading from multiple sources. If you read from 10 different books and notes, you're going to mix up everything and forget everything. Correct? So please limit your reading material. Keep it as minimal as possible. That's why I told you, just the PPT, class notes, and our current affairs material should be enough. If you need additional material, I've told you what to do. Is that clear? So I hope this clarifies most of your doubts with regard to the syllabus and how to approach the syllabus. So now we can begin with some basic concepts in international relations. Over the next 1 hour, 10 minutes or 1 hour, 15 minutes, I would like to cover some basic essential concepts. Is that clear? We'll start with the very basic definition of foreign policy. We'll understand what is foreign policy, or rather, why should a country have a foreign policy of its own? Why do governments have a dedicated ministry to look after the foreign relations of the country? Like India has Ministry of External Affairs, the MEA, which is the nodal ministry to conduct India's foreign policy, right? Similarly, every country has a dedicated ministry. The US has the US State Department, right? China, Pakistan, all European countries, all major countries in the world, right? Any government will have a dedicated ministry looking after the foreign relations of the country. Now, why is this necessary? Why is foreign policy required? Or what is foreign policy? Let's say someone asks you this question, what will be your answer? UPSC might give you this question. It might ask a 10 marks question in mains, asking you to explain why foreign policy is essential for a country's growth and stability. Discuss. Such basic, straightforward questions can come, and you can't answer them efficiently without understanding the concept. So let me explain what is foreign policy, and based on that, I'll be discussing few related concepts. Foreign policy is basically, it's a tool, it's an instrument available to your government through which the government is protecting and promoting the national interests of the country. Is that clear? To protect and promote the national interests of the nation, foreign policy becomes a tool or an instrument in the hands of a sovereign government. The government of the day, which is responsible for the economy, the security of the nation, the stability of the nation, right, has to take care of the national interests. We will understand what are national interests. That's a separate discussion altogether. After this, we will understand what exactly are national interests. For now, just understand that national interests are nothing but the interests of the nation. See, all of us have certain interests, right? At a personal level, at an individual level, we all have certain interests. That I want to do well in my exams. I want to do well in my career. I want to lead a happy, fruitful life, maintain good relations. That's our individual interests. Similarly, a nation, a country also has certain interests, right? The government has certain interests. So to protect those interests and promote those interests, foreign policy is a tool. It's one of the instruments through which national interests of the country can be protected and promoted. Is that clear? That is the basic, simple explanation of what is foreign policy. It's a tool or an instrument available to the government of the day, right, to protect and promote the national interests of the country. Now, the next big question: what do you mean by national interests? This is another important concept. Again, a mains question can come here. Maybe even a prelims conceptual question can be asked. You should understand what are national interests. How do we define it? Right? What constitutes the national interest of a country, especially that of India? So here I would like to show you two important quotes. One from former President Pranab Mukherjee, who has been a top leader, right? He has been India's foreign minister, defense minister as well, right? When he was the president, Pranab Mukherjee had said, India's foreign policy, with its civilizational roots and heritage, is based on the principles of developing peaceful, friendly relations with all countries. We will pursue our international engagement based on enlightened national interest, combining the strength of our values with pragmatism, leading to a doctrine of mutually beneficial relationships. This is what former President Pranab Mukherjee had said while addressing a joint session of the Indian Parliament. From this statement, you can understand that the country has certain interests. Could be economic interests, political interests, security interests, cultural interests, social interests. So protecting and promoting them is the bread and butter of foreign policy of the nation. Foreign policy is primarily concerned about the national interests of the country. If we have to maintain peaceful relations with all the countries, especially with our neighbors, if we want to build mutually beneficial partnerships, if we want to find markets for our exports, if we want to attract investments, if we want to secure our borders, promote our image, then foreign policy is needed to protect these interests. And these interests of the country become the national interests of the country. Is that clear? Some of these interests are based on the values of the nation, the values of the country, the principles on which the country is built. Some of these interests are more pragmatic, they're more realistic. All right, so it's a mix of values, principles, and pragmatic objectives that is rooted in our civilizational heritage. Our civilizational heritage plays a big role in influencing our foreign policy, right? So there are certain specific areas in which foreign policy plays a key role to look after the well-being of the country, to ensure the country grows at a fast rate, to ensure there are enough employment opportunities, to drive investments and growth, to hunt for raw materials, to stabilize our borders, to deal with conflicts and tensions, to tackle threats like terrorism, right? For all of this, you need foreign policy. And foreign policy is interested in protecting and promoting your national interests. So, related to the same topic, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, even he made a very important statement recently. I would like to quote that. He said that Indian foreign policy decisions are made in the national interests of the country, which means foreign policy of the government is directly driven by the national interests of the nation. He said we are guided by our thinking, our views, and our interests. This was a statement he made regarding the ongoing Ukraine conflict and how India is balancing its position over the Ukraine conflict in order to strike a balance between Russia and the Western countries. As you know, the world has been divided over the Ukraine conflict, with Western countries on one side and Russia and its allies on the other side. India has been caught in between with regard to the Ukraine situation because we have good ties with Russia. We have good ties with Western countries, especially the United States. So India has been facing this dilemma of balancing these conflicting powers and conflicting interests. In this regard, Foreign Minister Jaishankar said that our foreign policy is driven by our interests, our national interests. Is that clear? So national interests are nothing but the core interests of a nation. anything that deals with the well-being of a nation, anything that deals with the growth and stability of the country, the society, right? That can be labeled as national interests. Now, let us see what can be classified as national interests of India. Let's look at some national interests of India. You'll get better clarity following this discussion. For example, one major national interest of any government is to secure the defense and security and strategic goals of the country. Ensure that we protect our borders, defend our borders from hostile threats. There could be hostile neighbors like Pakistan or China who might be threatening our borders, who might be trying to dispute our sovereignty, right? There could be a war-like situation. There could be hostile countries sponsoring terrorism against our country. There could be criminal activities present along the border, like drug trafficking, arms trafficking, which is a security threat for us. There could be a border dispute. Border might be disputed between two countries, which has become a source of conflict. So defending the nation, upholding the sovereignty, the integrity of the nation, dealing with all the security challenges, and achieving our strategic goals is a core national interest. Is that clear? So securing the defense of the nation, achieving our national security objectives, protecting our sovereignty and integrity, and focusing on our strategic goals is a national interest. Like, for example, India wants to play a big role in the Indo-Pacific. We want to stabilize the Indo-Pacific. That is a strategic goal, a long-term strategic goal of India. So that is a national interest of India. So if any adverse development happens in the Indo-Pacific, India will focus on that because it's our national interest. Is that clear? So ensuring the defense of the nation, security of the nation, and pursuing long-term strategic goals is a core national interest. Next, maximizing trade, economic, and commerce between other countries, with other countries. Promoting trade opportunities, like finding new markets for our exports. See, to grow our economy, we need to support our producers, our manufacturers, our exporters, right? Our farmers, our industries, manufacturing industries, our services industry, the MSME industry, they need support from the government. The government has to help in finding new markets where our goods can be exported. This will fetch revenue for us. Foreign exchange can be earned. This will create jobs in our economy. It will drive our economy. We might need certain raw materials which we don't have. We may have to source raw materials that are critical for various industries. Like, for example, lithium, uranium, right? Fossil fuels, crude oil, natural gas. We are deficient in these reserves, in these natural resources. Since our economy has a critical dependency on such resources, especially crude oil and natural gas, we need to hunt for those raw materials from other countries. You can't source them without building good relations, and that is a core national interest. For example, to protect the energy security of the nation, to ensure we have enough supplies of crude oil and natural gas, we need to maintain good ties with oil exporting nations. We need to look out for new partners, negotiate the best price, negotiate and buy oil at cheapest price possible to reduce the import bill, or else it will become a financial burden. It will increase our current account deficit. That is where foreign policy comes in, and this becomes a national interest of the country. So finding markets for exports, finding raw materials and sourcing them, and also attracting investments like FDI, foreign direct investment, into our market. To create infrastructure, we need capital, right? To drive industrial growth, we need investments, foreign investments. We'll need investments into our stock markets as well, into our capital markets. So attracting FDI, FII into our market is a core objective. And we also try to negotiate free trade agreements to improve the movement of goods, services, and people between different countries. We negotiate free trade agreements. This is also part of the economic objective. So this is a national interest of any country, especially that of India. Maximizing the trade opportunities, the economic relations, and promoting commerce between different countries. Next, projecting the soft power of the nation to propagate our cultural assets and civilizational heritage. This is another national interest of India. See, India is an ancient civilization. There is a rich history behind India. We have a rich civilizational history. For example, the religious connect we have with other countries through Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and of course, all the other religions as well, be it Sikhism, Jainism, Christianity, Judaism. Exploring the religious connect with other countries, leveraging the civilizational religious connect. For example, across Asian countries, Buddhism is very popular. Be it Sri Lanka, be it Myanmar, Nepal, China, Japan, South Korea, across Southeast Asia, Buddhism is a popular religion, and India is the birthplace of Buddhism. So, in our foreign policy, we tap our Buddhist heritage. We work on our Buddhist heritage and establish those cultural links. With Nepal, with Sri Lanka, and few other countries, we work on the Hindu connection. With West Asian, Central Asian countries, and some Southeast Asian countries, we leverage the Islamic connection, right? So, religious connect plays a very important role, and any cultural symbol, it could be a shared language, it could be shared ethnicity, or it could be art and culture, right? Promoting these cultural symbols and leveraging our civilizational heritage is part of soft power diplomacy. Is that clear? For example, we promote Indian classical dance, Indian classical music like Bharatnatyam, Hindustani, Carnatic music, right? Kathak and Kathakali. They find a huge global audience. So we leverage those links. We work on our art and culture. We promote our heritage. We even rely on movies, contemporary music or modern music as well, which forms a connect. Like for example, Bollywood movies have been very popular across countries since 60s and 70s. You go to Japan, you go to any former Soviet republic, go to Russia, go to Central Asia, across West Asia and Europe, especially in the Eurasia belt and Central Asia region. Bollywood has a mass following since 60s and 70s. Even today in Central Asia and parts of Russia and other parts of Eurasia, right? The movies and songs of, let's say, Mithun Chakravorty, Devanand, right, of that era is still widely popular. And it's not just about Bollywood, right? There is a global audience today for Indian cinema in general. And that plays a big role in diplomacy as well. It promotes our cultural influence across countries. It forms that automatic connection, that immediate connection with the people of another country. So we leverage these cultural assets of India and we promote them through our foreign policy. This is called as soft power diplomacy. In diplomacy, there are usually two types. You have hard power projection, all right, and you have soft power projection. In diplomacy, two types of power is projected by a country. When we say hard power projection, it means we are using our military strength and economic strength to punish another country or coerce another country. Basically, when force is used, right, to force another country to change its behavior, that is called hard power projection. You use your armed forces, your intelligence agencies, right, to punish a country which is sponsoring terrorism against us. You conduct covert operations, to destabilize another country, to target terror groups. Or you might launch precision strikes, surgical strikes, or you might go to war with another country using maximum force to protect your interests. You're trying to force another country, coerce another country to change its behavior by using your military strength. Or you're threatening a country by using your military strength. Similarly, you can leverage your economic strength. Let's say imposing sanctions. For example, the US has imposed sanctions on Iran, North Korea, Russia, China. Western countries in general have imposed sanctions on Russia. So using the economic strength to punish another country, to harm the economic interests of another country, to force the country to change its behavior, that is called hard power projection. You're not approaching as a friend. You're not relying on your friendly image. You're not trying to build a mutually beneficial and equal partnership. You're dominating over another country. You're forcing another country, coercing another country to change its behavior through your military and economic strength. That is called hard power projection. Is that clear? India's surgical strikes in Pakistan following terror attacks. India's role in getting Pakistan grey listed at Financial Action Task Force at FATF. That's an example of hard power projection, right? The Western sanctions on Russia, Iran, China, etc. These are examples of hard power projection. Whereas soft power projection is the opposite. In soft power projection, you're not forcing anyone. You're not leveraging your strength to punish another country or force another country. Rather, you're building a mutually beneficial partnership. That is called soft power projection. The focus is to create equal partnership, to build an equal relationship. Doesn't matter how big or small the other country is, but you treat them as equal partners. You provide assistance. Let's say you provide economic assistance to win favor in another country. Or let's say you make investments, you take up key projects and finance them. Right? Let's say a country has faced a disaster. You help them in disaster management through HADR operations, through HADR assistance. HADR stands for Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief. When countries are affected by disasters like earthquakes or cyclones or tsunamis, right? Other countries will help out by providing disaster management assistance. This is technically called HADR. HADR stands for Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief. So you're helping another country, assisting them. You will give them loans. You will give them investments. You provide concessional loans, provide aid. You leverage your cultural symbols, cultural assets. Like, for example, how India has promoted yoga. Right? Yoga is inherently linked to Indian civilizational heritage. So we have promoted yoga through our diplomacy around the world for many decades. Now we have got International Yoga Day designated through the UN. And even before that, yoga has been an integral part of Indian diplomacy. Alternate systems of medicine like Ayush, that includes yoga, Ayurveda, Unani, Siddha, homeopathy, right? Alternate medicines are very popular, traditional medicinal systems. So we promote this through our diplomacy as well. We promote Indian art form, Indian dances, music, our movies, right? Indian food, festivals. They're all integral to our culture, to our civilization, right? We leverage the strength of our civilizational heritage and promote that through our foreign policy. All of this is called soft power projection. When you're helping others, building an equal partnership, promoting your cultural values, working with the community abroad, that is called soft power diplomacy. So foreign policy of any country is a mix of both. You can't rely only on hard power all the time. You can't rely on just soft power all the time. Good foreign policy will include a mix of both, and ensuring this is a national interest of the country. That's exactly what India does. India ensures that there is a fine mix of hard power and soft power in our diplomacy. All right. Other national interests include exporting a certain ideological agenda. let's say we are a democracy, right? India has a strong commitment to democracy, human rights, constitutional principles. So promoting that through foreign policy is a national interest. You are promoting a certain ideology. China, Russia, they are authoritarian states believing in communism. They do promote, propagate communist ideas. So that is their national interest. But for India and other democracies, we believe in constitutional principles, we believe in fundamental rights, we believe in human rights. So we promote that through our foreign policy and help other countries as well to strengthen their democracy. We have championed something called the non-aligned movement as an ideological agenda back in the 1960s. I'll come to that. I'll discuss what is non-aligned movement a little later. We'll understand one more concept after this. So there you'll understand what is non-aligned movement. It was an ideology that India promoted, India founded during the Cold War period. So promoting an ideology, exporting an ideological agenda is also a national interest. Creating more space in the international arena. There are many international groupings, international institutions like World Bank, IMF, United Nations, Non-Proliferation Treaty, Climate Change Convention, and many others. So when we are participating in negotiations at these multilateral platforms, at these multilateral organizations, we need to protect our own interests and create a support for our own position. Because usually at these groupings and organizations, there will be a divide between developed countries and developing countries. Like, for example, if you look at climate change negotiations, if you look at WTO negotiations, or reforms of the UN, reforms of World Bank and IMF, on all these important multilateral platforms, there is a divide between the global north and the global south. When I say global north, global south, I'm not referring to the direction. It's not the north and south direction. In geopolitics, in international relations, when we say north and south, it refers to developed countries and developing underdeveloped nations. Global north countries are the developed, advanced, industrialized economies like US, Canada, Australia, Japan, all your West European countries, right? They are the developed nations, the industrialized nations. They are called the global north. The global south refers to developing and underdeveloped countries like India, Brazil, Indonesia, right? China, all these are developing nations. There are many underdeveloped countries, small countries in Africa, Asia, in South America. They're all part of the global south. So at these multilateral organizations, there will be a divide between these different countries. Different groups would be formed. So to protect our interests, to protect our position, we need support of other countries. We need to work with them to create that space, to create more options for us in international arena. And this is a national interest. You saw this recently at the G20 summit, right? India was pushing a certain agenda at the G20, and we needed support of other countries to ensure we bring out a joint statement, to bring out a New Delhi declaration. So India worked with different powers. We negotiated with them, brought them to a middle ground, and finally succeeded in bringing out a joint statement. So that is how you create more options, more space for yourself in multilateral platforms. And this is a national interest. And finally, another national interest is to ensure the well-being, ensure the safety and well-being of the Indian diaspora abroad. Because the Indian diaspora plays a very big role. The NRIs, non-resident Indians, people of Indian origin, together they constitute the Indian community abroad, the Indian diaspora abroad. They are acting as the cultural ambassadors of the country. They are promoting India's civilizational, cultural heritage and values. Right? Today, India has a very strong diaspora community around the world. They are naturally creating an influence for India. They are projecting India's soft power influence, they can help in creating a positive image for India with the host government and with the host country. They can positively influence foreign governments and foreign societies in favor of India. Let's say India wants to strike an agreement with a certain country. The Indian community there can influence the government and the people and the society, because Indian community, right, wherever they go, wherever they settle, they adapt and they integrate with that society. They don't break the law, they don't threaten the other country, rather they contribute to the growth of the other country. Right, wherever Indians go, they've contributed positively to the economy and the growth of the other nations as well. In many countries, Indians or Indian diaspora, they happen to be the backbone of their economy. Look at Mauritius, look at Saudi Arabia, UAE, US, right? Around the world, there are many nations where Indian community plays a critical role in their economy and in their growth. Many Indians are in influential positions, right? There are successful businessmen. There are Indian leaders of Indian origin. Today, you have head of states, head of governments who are of Indian origin, right? Like Rishi Sunak, Kamala Harris, and many more. There are several cabinet ministers, top officials and diplomats in foreign governments who are of Indian origin, who are from the Indian community. So they can positively influence foreign countries, foreign governments, and their policy towards India to create a positive image. They can promote our influence, promote our cultural influence, and they also send remittances back home to India. The money they send back home is crucial for the Indian economy. Today, India has become the world's largest recipient of inward remittances. Is that clear? Does anyone have an idea? How much remittances do we get in a year? Recently, we have broken a record and we have become the world's biggest recipient of remittances. Do you have an idea what is the amount of remittances we get in a single year? Anyone? Can anyone tell me in the comments? Very good. Purva, Lucky, Janvi, Shovik, Shubhajit, Kishan, Pooja, Aniket, Abhishek, Naveen and others, Saurabh, they've all got it right. It's more than $100 billion. We have crossed the $100 billion mark. We overtook China as well. In the last 2 years, India has been receiving the largest remittances in the world, which is more than $100 billion. This is a huge sum of money, right? It is critical to build our forex reserves. It is crucial to bridge our current account deficit because we always have a trade deficit. We import more than we export, right? One way of bridging the deficit is through remittances. So foreign remittances are crucial for our economy. So Indian community is playing such a big role. They are projecting Indian foreign policy influence, acting as cultural ambassadors of India, contributing to the nation's economy and growth and creating a positive image for India. So it's only the duty of the Indian government to ensure their safety and well-being because they might get caught in conflicts. Look at Ukraine. When the Russian invasion happened into Ukraine, thousands of Indian students were trapped. Recently in Sudan, when Sudan descended into a civil war in Africa, thousands of Indians were trapped and they all had to be evacuated and rescued. So Indians might face challenges abroad. Correct? Indian diaspora might face a lot of problems. They might face security threats. They might get caught in wars, conflicts, and civil wars. They might be caught in a zone where there are terror attacks. There might be natural disasters. They might face issues related to visa, passport, or they might get arrested. They might face legal issues. They might face issues with regard to their employment. Indian workers abroad, they might face visa related issues or pension insurance related issues. They might be facing exploitation by their employers in foreign countries. Indian students might be facing difficulties with their universities and the legal system there. So helping the Indian community abroad becomes the duty of the Indian government. That is a core national interest. Is that clear? So broadly, this is what we can define as national interests of India. Ensuring the security of the nation, the defense of the nation, pursuing strategic goals, maximizing trade and economic opportunities, projecting soft power influence with a mix of hard power, exporting a certain ideology, especially democracy, human rights, etc., creating more space at multilateral platforms, creating support for India's position, and protecting the safety well-being of the Indian diaspora and leveraging the Indian diaspora for furthering our foreign policy. These are some basic national interests of India. Now the question is, who defines these interests? National interests are defined by the government of the day. Of course, it's the government which is in power, which defines what's the national interest of the country. Is that clear? Some interests are permanent, like some interests will be always a part of your foreign policy. Doesn't matter which government comes to power, which party gets elected. Now, let's say in India, whether it's the Congress or BJP or a coalition government, irrespective of who's in power, irrespective of the party and its ideology, some interests of India, they remain constant, like India's commitment to democracy, our belief in soft power diplomacy, our belief in helping others, in assisting others, in building mutually beneficial partnerships. These are constants in Indian foreign policy, does not change. We follow an independent foreign policy since the times of Prime Minister Nehru, right? So those are some principles which never change, even if governments are changing. But some others, they keep evolving with changing geopolitics, with changing technology, changing economy, right? And changing challenges. Of course, foreign policy changes, interests will also change. But the government of the day defines what the national interests of the country are. Is that clear? In this regard, there's a very important statement. It's often said that in international relations, there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. You only have permanent interests. It's a very, very popular quote. It's often attributed to Henry Kissinger, but it's actually a wrong attribution. This quote has been in use since a very old time, right? There are historical references that connect the statement with Lord Palmerston, and there are many other key thinkers and philosophers who have made the same statement. It has been repeated again and again by many leaders, many ministers, prime ministers, and presidents, right? But it's a very popular statement that helps you understand the importance of national interests. Countries are driven by their interests, which are permanent. You don't have permanent friends or permanent enemies here. Yesterday's enemy might become today's best friend. That is how international relations can change. For example, look at the World War period. European countries were fighting against each other, right? Germany was an enemy for UK and France. Today they are allies, they are best of friends. US was an enemy to Japan and the other Axis powers during World War, but today they are all allies. They are all part of the same the same power block. During Cold War period, Europe was divided, ideologically divided between US and Soviet Union, right? But today all these dynamics have changed. Yesterday's enemies have become today's friends. Yesterday's friends have become today's enemies. So, in the world of international relations, you do not have any permanent friends or permanent enemies. In the Indian context, the US was very hostile to us back in the 1970s. During the Cold War period, from 1970s to early 2000, from 1970s to 2001, for almost 3 decades, US was actually hostile to India. It was threatening India. India US did not have a good relationship. We didn't trust each other. But today, this is the defining partnership of the century. We have become the closest of friends today. So in the world of geopolitics and international relations, please remember this: you do not have any permanent friends. You do not have any permanent enemies either. You only have permanent interests. Governments, countries, they only pursue interests, not friends or enemies. That keeps changing. Today, Pakistan might be a hostile country. China might be a hostile country. You never know, 30, 40 years later, they might become our best friends. That is how quickly geopolitics can change. So countries pursue their interests, their national interests, and that is the only permanent thing in foreign policy. Is that clear? So, talking about national interests, I would like to talk about one very, very important concept, which is the foundational principle of Indian foreign policy. There is a fundamental principle that underlies India's foreign policy. In fact, India's foreign policy is rooted on this principle. Is that clear? It's called the principle of strategic autonomy. The principle of strategic autonomy is the foundational principle of Indian foreign policy. It was envisioned and laid down by the first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. And this principle has remained consistent in our foreign policy till date, till the times of Prime Minister Modi. Subsequent governments, be it under Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri, Indira Gandhi, right? Be it under Rajiv Gandhi or P. Narasimha Rao, I.K. Gujral or Deve Gowda or Atal Bihari Vajpayee or Manmohan Singh, under subsequent prime ministers and governments, this principle has remained a constant in Indian foreign policy. This is called the bedrock or the foundational stone of India's foreign policy. So you need to understand what it is, right? The principle of strategic autonomy means that India pursues an independent foreign policy. It means we maintain our autonomy in our foreign policy. We maintain our autonomy in our foreign policy. Our foreign policy is designed to fulfill our national interests. We are not looking to fulfill the interests of some other country. Is that clear? It means we are not allies of any power. We don't join any military clubs. We don't target one country against another. That is, we don't join a group of countries to target another country. Is that clear? We don't play such power politics. We don't join any military groupings. We have never been a part of any military club. Is that clear? And we are not allies of anyone. We are not an ally of Russia. We are not an ally of the US. We are friends of every country. All right? Today we call this policy as multi-alignment, meaning we align with any country that fulfills our national interests. What matters to India is the national interest of the country. We are not bothered about American interests. We are not bothered about Russian interests or Chinese interests. That is their own interests. We are bothered about our own interests. World of geopolitics and international relations is indeed a little selfish world. That is how it should be. You first have to look after your own interests. No one else will do that for you. Is that clear? So, we are not allies of anyone. We don't go and join clubs targeting one against the other. All right? We follow an independent approach. We decide what we want to do based on our interests. If it suits our interests, we will do that. So, if required, we'll align with Russia to procure weapons, oil, etc. If required, we'll bypass Western sanctions against Russia. We'll also work with Western countries closely because we gain by working with Western countries as well. So, wherever India benefits, right, we are okay to work because what matters to us is India's interests, not the interests of another country. So, this independence in our foreign policy, this autonomy that we maintain, right, this is based on the principle of strategic autonomy that was laid down by Prime Minister Nehru. This has been consistently followed in our foreign policy by subsequent governments and prime ministers, irrespective of which party they came from. Is that clear? So, be it our nuclear program, be it how India pursued its own nuclear program, be it how we have built our energy security, be it how we championed the non-aligned movement during the Cold War, right? Or even with regard to how we have dealt with Myanmar, with Iran, with Russia, right? We have bypassed Western sanctions against Russia and we have struck a balance between Russia and Western countries. This is possible because we follow an independent foreign policy. Even at G20 summit that was held recently, we achieved a success. We could bring all countries together to a common understanding, to a common ground because of our independent foreign policy. Because we are not aligned with one power bloc, right? We work with Western countries as well. We'll work with Russia and China as well if required. We'll work with Pakistan as well if required, if that serves our interests. So we truly follow the principle that there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. We just have permanent interests. So the foundational principle is this, the principle of strategic autonomy, that we maintain independence in our foreign policy. There have been a rare exceptions here and there. Once in a while, we have breached the principle. We'll discuss that in future classes. But 99% of the time, from 1947 till today, we have followed this principle. This is the strength of Indian foreign policy, that we are independent. We look after our own interests first. We are not here to serve the interests of another country. So we don't have to listen to what others are dictating to us. Now, US might force us to follow sanctions against Russia, but we will reject them. We will bypass them because we know that Russia is a critical partner for us. That doesn't mean we'll harm our ties with US. We'll maintain good ties with US as well. We'll strike that balance between US and Russia. So maintaining that position in between, that balanced position, is the result of independent foreign policy. It is a result of the strategic autonomy. Or else it would not be possible. Is that clear? So this is the strength of Indian foreign policy and the very core pillar of Indian foreign policy. We saw this in action for the first time back in 1950s and 1960s when we championed the non-aligned movement during the Cold War period. For beginners who don't know what is the Cold War, the Cold War was a period of intense geopolitical rivalry from 1947 to 1991. That is after the Second World War came to an end in 1945, right? A new world order emerged. The world got divided between Western countries that stood for democracy and capitalism. This was the political and economic model that they believed in. They believed in constitutional democracy, fundamental rights. They put faith on human rights. They believed capitalism is the right approach for economic development. So these countries are your Western countries, led by US and other Western European countries. Also includes Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, etc. Essentially, all the American allies, all the Western countries, the developed industrialized countries, which were democracies, which aligned with US, they were part of the Western bloc. Their rivalry was with the Eastern bloc that stood for communism and socialism. This bloc was led primarily by the Soviet Union and by few East European countries. All the communist states that aligned with Soviet Union, they formed the Eastern Bloc and a divide emerged between them. This whole period of almost 40 plus years witnessed intense rivalry between these powers, and as part of this geopolitical rivalry, they would even wage covert wars against each other. They would wage covert proxy wars against each other to target the other side. That is, Western governments, through their intelligence agencies, would try to destabilize the countries of Eastern Bloc. like the CIA of the United States, the Central Intelligence Agency of the US, the MI6 of Britain, the Foreign Intelligence Agency of Britain, right? Like this. These Western governments, through their intelligence agencies, would run these secret operations, covert operations, using proxy elements, proxy actors to target the Soviet Union and its allies. Similarly, the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries would target Western countries. The KGB, the intelligence agency of the former Soviet Union, right, along with the other intelligence agencies of East European countries, they would target Western democracies. They would undermine their interests, subvert them, try to destabilize them. This period of intense geopolitical rivalry and secret wars between these power blocks is called the Cold War. Basically, during this period, the world was divided into two poles. It was a bipolar world. It was a divided world. So these countries were looking for allies. Western countries were trying to attract all democracies towards them. Soviet Union and the communist countries were trying to attract other countries to make them their allies. So all other countries were being forced to choose between the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. But India was never comfortable with this. We rejected this idea. We said, we need not make this choice. We need not align with US or Soviet Union. We can remain non-aligned, meaning will not align with either of them. We championed a third neutral ideology. We carved the middle path with other like-minded countries and established the non-aligned movement in 1961. The roots of this movement is traced to the Bandung Conference held in Indonesia in 1955. The ideology was championed by India's Prime Minister Nehru with like-minded leaders from Yugoslavia, Indonesia, Egypt, and Ghana. These were the founding members of the non-aligned movement. Is that clear? So throughout the Cold War, at least until 1971, India was a leader of the non-aligned approach. Meaning, will respect the sovereignty, integrity of all nations, will not interfere with another country, will not join these power blocks where we target one against the other. We didn't get into that race where the world was being divided between these two poles, these two power blocks. Right? This was India's vision. This was an example of our principle of strategic autonomy. India could come out with such a policy and champion this policy for many years because we were following an independent foreign policy. Is that clear? Today, the movement has around 120 countries. There are around 20 observer states, not 17. Just make a small correction. There are 20 observer states and 120 member countries today in the non-aligned movement. But of course, non-alignment became irrelevant. Today it is irrelevant. We moved away from non-alignment from 1971 itself. Gradually, our focus on non-alignment has declined and it has become irrelevant after 1991. Because that is when the Cold War ended. The Cold War ended in 1991 with the collapse and disintegration of the Soviet Union. Essentially, communism failed, right? The Western democracies, they won the Cold War and communism saw a defeat. Across Central Eastern Europe, all the communist countries, they abandoned communism. The model had failed. The socialist communist model had failed. Soviet Union itself would disintegrate and collapse, giving rise to many new countries in Eastern Europe and in Central Asia. Russia would become the successor state, but many other regions of Soviet Union broke apart to form new countries like Ukraine, your Central Asian countries, Azerbaijan, and the others. All right. So with the collapse and disintegration of Soviet Union, Cold War came to an end in 91, following which non-alignment movement has become largely irrelevant and outdated. In fact, in the last 15-20 years, we are not paying much attention to non-alignment. If you look at Prime Minister Modi and even former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, they have not attended non-aligned movement summits, NAM summits, they've skipped them. They haven't attended them. That shows that we don't attach too much importance to the NAM movement today. But back in the Cold War period, especially from 60s to 70s, this was a very important movement that we had championed as a result of our belief in maintaining an independent foreign policy. Is that clear? This was a contribution of India. We played a role in reducing tensions in the world when the world was divided between the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. That is the big contribution of India. This belief in non-alignment, this belief in strategic autonomy continued for many years. And even though non-aligned movement today has become irrelevant and outdated, we still support and champion the principle of strategic autonomy. Is that clear? So this is where I would like to explain a very important concept. In political science, there are theories, two important theories, that is idealism and realism. Because international relations is part of political science. That's why you have an optional subject called PSIR, Political Science and International Relations, right? In international relations, you study the foreign policy of different countries. That's what we are doing right now. That's the theory of international relations. But those who practice international relations, they are your diplomats, the ones who are representing the country officially, right? Our foreign service officers, IFS officers, our government leaders, including the president, the prime minister, and any government leader or official who represents the country officially. They become the diplomats of the country. They negotiate. They come out with initiatives and agreements, right, which are designed to protect and promote our national interests. So diplomacy is all about the art of negotiation. It's the art and science of negotiation, how you conduct your talks with other countries, how you reach conclusions and agreements, and how you protect your interests. So in the exercise of diplomacy, in the world of international relations, there are two schools of thought. You have the idealist school of thought and the realist school of thought. In idealism, the belief is that foreign policy should be driven by values. Foreign policy should be driven by principles like human rights, religious freedom, democratic constitutional rights, etc. So principles, morals, values, ethics, they play a bigger role in an idealistic foreign policy, which is followed by idealistic leaders. Like John F. Kennedy, he said that every nation, whether it wishes well or ill, we will support those countries irrespective of how they work with us. It means the US said it has a commitment to help countries that are facing poverty, that are affected by disasters, that need help and assistance. So John F. Kennedy, who was seen as an idealist largely, right, he said that we should help any country. Doesn't matter whether they are a friend or an enemy. So this was a foreign policy largely based on idealism, where you strongly believe in values, ethics, morals, and principles. You believe that values like human rights, democratic constitutional principles, freedom of religion, right? All these principles that are part of liberty, they become the fundamental base for idealist school of thought. So if your foreign policy is largely driven by these considerations, it's an idealistic foreign policy. Is that clear? But in the real world, idealism does not work all the time. It's good to be idealistic sometimes, but you can't be idealistic all the time. There will be circumstances where you have to be realistic. You have to be driven by a pragmatic approach. Pragmatism becomes necessary to protect your national interests. Such a foreign policy which is just focused on national interests of the country, right? Even if it means ignoring principles, values, morals, and ethics. Such a foreign policy is a realistic foreign policy. Take, for example, the Russia-Ukraine war. Yes, what Russia did is illegal. It's against international law. Russia is the one which has broken the UN Charter. India knows that very well. But instead of being idealistic, we know Russia has committed war crimes, it has violated human rights of Ukrainians. But still, India has chosen to ignore these ideals. Not once have we criticized Russia openly. Not once have we voted against Russia at UN or any platform, right? It means we have kept aside idealism because Russia is a critical partner, strategic partner. Keeping the pragmatic national interests in mind, we have pursued a pragmatic, realistic policy. We have done this with Myanmar, we have done this with Iran and many other countries as well. So when countries ignore idealism and follow more practical, realistic approach, that is called realism or pragmatism. Henry Kissinger was seen as one such pragmatist. Henry Kissinger was the national security advisor of the US. He has served President Nixon, Richard Nixon, as the national security advisor. Later, he became the Secretary of State as well. He became the equivalent of the foreign minister of the US, right? So he was a firm believer in pragmatism. He always used to say that foreign policy should be realistic, driven by pragmatic approach, not based on ideals. See, a foreign policy of any country will be a mix of both. There will be some idealistic principles, there will be some commitment to values like human rights, democracy, constitutional principles, etc. At the same time, sometimes you have to ignore them, you ignore your ideals to achieve realistic goals and targets. To achieve your national interests, sometimes you have to get realistic. All right, so in political science and IR, there are two schools of thought, idealism and realism. And India's foreign policy is a mix of both. All right, we rely on idealism and as well as pragmatism, on realism as well. So even Prime Minister Modi has reiterated this many times. He was addressing a gathering in Singapore in 2018. He was addressing the Shangri-La Dialogue, which is a very popular event in Singapore, right? He said that India's principle of strategic autonomy remains very strong. When it comes to the rivalries between US, Russia, and China, India is not going to choose a side. Will not simply align with US, will not blindly join the clubs of US to target China, will not simply join Western countries in targeting Russia. Rather, will strike a balance between them because that is where India's interests are served. So this is a reiteration of the principle of strategic autonomy, which was laid down by Prime Minister Nehru. And since then, it has been consistently followed in our foreign policy. All right. So this is a very, very important concept that I've explained. I hope all of you have gained an insight into these essential concepts. We have two small topics left. Let's take a quick look. Let's wrap it up. Then I can look at your questions and we can even take a short break after that. So now you have understood what is foreign policy, what are national interests, what is the foundational principle of our foreign policy, right? What is idealism and realism? All these basics have been covered. The next basic concept is geopolitics. This is a term you frequently come across in your newspapers, in your current affairs. What do you mean by geopolitics? What if UPSC asks you a question that explain geopolitics, define geopolitics? How does geography of a place affect the politics of a place? Illustrate with examples. Such a mains question can be asked, right? So you should know what is geopolitics. Let me break it down for you. Geopolitics can be broken down into geography and politics. All right? See, don't mug up the definitions, never by heart. This is an examination which does not rely on your rote memory. All right? Understand the concept and write this in your own words. That's why even I'm trying to avoid using standard definitions. I'm not dictating you standard definitions. Rather, I'm explaining what it is. So you understand the concept, then you start writing it on your own, in your own words. So geopolitics, again, don't mug up the definition, right? Anybody can do that. Please understand, it's very simple. Break down the word into geography and politics. Geopolitics is nothing but The impact of geography on the politics of a place. As simple as that. You take any place, any country, the geography of that place, the geography of a country, its physical geography, and as well as human geography. The physical and human geography of a place directly influences the domestic and international politics of that place, and as well as the international relations of that place. Is that clear? The study of this is called geopolitics. When you study, analyze, understand how the geography of a place affects its foreign relations, that is geopolitics. You can practice geopolitics as well by altering geography. That is what is done through foreign policy. To overcome geographical limitations, geography can be altered through foreign policy in order to alter the international relations of that place. By manipulating the geography of a place, you can change the foreign relations, the international politics and relations of that place. So this in practice is called geopolitics as well. So in foreign policy, that is what countries do. They engage in geopolitics, right? They play geopolitics. Basically, they work with geography. They try to alter physical and human geographical elements to change the international relations and politics of the place to suit their respective interests. Now, how does this actually work, right? In real world, right? Is there an example we can think of? Let me give you an example. I know the definition may not convince you. Some of you might still be wondering, how can geography influence international relations? How can you alter geography, right? Let me explain this with an example. Here in this slide, we are looking at the map of Afghanistan. All right. Now, the moment I look at Afghanistan, the moment I look at its geography, there are some points that come to my mind. Now, let's say with regard to its physical geography, with regard to the physical geography of Afghanistan, first point I think I can think of is that it's a landlocked country. Correct? Meaning it's surrounded by land on all sides. It's bound by Iran, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. Correct? It has no direct opening to the sea. In today's world, being landlocked is a big economic limitation. Landlocked countries have a natural disadvantage because to export and import, to trade with the rest of the world, they have to depend on their neighboring countries. To access the sea, right? Today's economy, globalized economy, is largely a sea-based economy. Most of your exports and imports are happening through the sea route, through the maritime routes. So those countries which are landlocked, they are at an inherent disadvantage. It's a physical, geographical disadvantage. Because they can't trade with the rest of the world, they can't strengthen their economy, create jobs and stabilize their growth without relying on their neighboring countries. They need the support of their neighbors for transit access. To move the goods towards the sea, they have to depend on other countries. That becomes a limitation on them. It affects their economic growth and it makes them geopolitically vulnerable because the neighbors can misuse this advantage. Is that clear? Take Nepal. Nepal is another landlocked country. It's a landlocked nation. So it's a physical geographical limitation and it's heavily dependent on India for accessing the sea. We're going to study this in the next chapter. Nepal has a lot of dependency on India because without India, Nepal cannot access the Indian Ocean. Right? So physical geography plays a big role. Same with India. India is a thriving economy since ancient times and even today because we have direct open access to Indian Ocean. the Indian subcontinent, it's surrounded by water on three sides: the Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, and Indian Ocean. We have a very long coastline with island territories like Andaman, Nicobar, and Lakshadweep. So, physical geography of India plays a direct role in influencing our economy and our international relations, right? So, similarly, any physical geographical element like mountains, mountain ranges, access to sea, rivers, straits, gulf, right? All such geographical features, they play an important role in influencing the politics of a place and the international relations of a place. Is that clear? Physical geography is connected to the international relations of that given region. So please understand this. It's very, very important. Now, when there is a limitation, right? When there is a physical geographical limitation, we can overcome that. We can overcome the limitation through foreign policy. We can alter physical geography to overcome the limitation, and thus we can engage in geopolitics to serve our interests. For example, India had very good relations with the Afghan government from 2001 to 2021. During these 20 years, we had a friendly government in Afghanistan, which was a good friend of India. We had invested heavily in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is blessed with resources like iron ore, for example, and many other precious resources. Afghanistan was ready to provide these resources to India. We had fantastic relations with all Central Asian countries. With all the Central Asian countries you see here, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. We have very good ties with all of them. They were all ready to share resources with India. They are also blessed with resources. But unfortunately, there was a geographical problem. The problem was that India has no connectivity with Afghanistan and Central Asia. We don't have direct land connectivity. In the map, you might say that, sir, I see here there is a border. There is a border here between India and Afghanistan. You are correct. We do have a border, but it's only on paper. It's only a theoretical border. This is called the Wakhan Corridor. It's a narrow stretch of Afghanistan, right, in the Hindu Kush range, in the Hindu Kush mountain range, which connects with the Gilgit-Baltistan region of India. This is Gilgit-Baltistan. So, as part of the former state of Jammu and Kashmir, as it existed in 1947, the whole state belongs to India. But on the ground, what has happened? Our neighbor Pakistan has captured this territory illegally from India. This territory of Jammu and Kashmir, that includes parts of Gilgit-Baltistan, is under the illegal occupation of Pakistan, and we call it POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir. Right? From Kashmir to Gilgit-Baltistan, this whole area has been captured by Pakistan illegally in 1947. Since then, we don't have access to Wakhan Corridor. Otherwise, let's say Pakistan had not done this, let's say the whole state of J&K belonged to India, then we would have shared a small boundary, a land boundary of around 96 kilometers over here. So through Gilgit-Baltistan, we could have directly connected with Wakhan Corridor, and thus with Afghanistan, and of course with Central Asia as well, with Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. But this route is not available to us thanks to Pakistan, which has captured this territory, the POK region, the Gilgit-Baltistan region, and hence on the ground we don't share this boundary with Afghanistan. So this became a limitation on our relationship. The physical geography was limiting our ties with Afghanistan and Central Asia. So what did we do? We changed geography itself. We tried to change the geography itself. We worked with Iran to build a strategic port over here called the Chabahar port to bypass Pakistan, because Pakistan would never give us direct access. Given our tensions and hostility with Pakistan, it would never give us direct access to Afghanistan through land. Even if it gives, it will not be a reliable route, because terror groups might target the route. Pakistan itself might misuse the route to put pressure on India, given the state of relations between India and Pakistan. So connecting with Afghanistan via Pakistan was never an option, never a viable option. So to overcome this geographical limitation, we created a port. A strategic port was built by India, the Chabahar port in Iran. From here, we were planning to build a railway line to connect with Afghanistan, where India had already built a strategic road. India had built a strategic road here inside Afghanistan. This was an Indian built road. Our ambitious plan was to connect this road in Afghanistan with the Chabahar railway line to link with the Chabahar port from where goods can be brought to India. Our ambition was to extend this route to Central Asia as well. Right? This was one of the plans of India to overcome the limitation. That is one way of overcoming the geographical hurdles, and that is called engaging in geopolitics. Similarly, human geography plays a role. Human geography, which is nothing but the demography of a place, plays a role in international relations. For example, which religions are present, which ethnicities are present, which racial groups are present, which languages are spoken, the age group, the gender profile, literacy rates. All these demographic factors, human geographical elements, also influence the international relations of a place. A country with a high literacy rate will continue to grow, and as the economy grows, its foreign policy will also be stronger, right? The majority groups, the majority religions, majority ethnic groups, racial groups, linguistic groups, and the minorities, the divisions between them also plays a role. In any country, right, there will be social divisions between majority and minority groups. So if there is large scale communal division, or if there is polarization on ethnic lines, like it happened in Sri Lanka, look at the Sri Lankan civil war, right? It's a direct result of human geography. The Sri Lankan civil war was a result of the oppression of the Tamil minorities by the Sinhala Buddhist majority. See what's happening in Myanmar, right? The radical Buddhists, they have oppressed the Rohingya Muslims who are in minority. So there are many examples to show that human geography plays a role in influencing the politics of a region and thus the international relations of a region. And countries can influence this. Other countries, they can play around physical geography and human geography, engage in geopolitics to achieve their national interests. Understood? So let's say US wants to interfere in Afghanistan. All right. US can work with some ethnic groups like Pashtuns. Pashtuns are a major ethnic group. If US wants to achieve certain interests in Afghanistan, it would try reaching out to Pashtun community, sponsor them, support them to achieve a certain national interest. So that is how countries engage in geopolitics. Geography plays a big role in international relations. You can work around it. You can leverage this in your foreign policy. Is that clear? So geopolitics is nothing but the study of the impact of geography, that is human physical geography, on the international relations of the place. You can engage in geopolitics through your foreign policy by altering, by working around the physical and human geography of a place. That is called geopolitics. Now, coming to the last point of this chapter, India's primary area of strategic interest. In our foreign policy, we have identified a given area and we call this our primary area of interest. Because see, India as a country has very limited resources. We have a limited budget, right? We have limited armed forces. We can't have a global area of interest like US. A major power like US or even China, they can have ambition of having a global area of interest. Like US, for example, it can deploy its military forces, be it in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, in the Persian Gulf, in the Atlantic, wherever you want. US has the ability to deploy its Navy, Air Force, and Army. It has the ability to exercise diplomatic influence around the world. Be it in the Arctic, be it in West Asia, be it in the Pacific, US can be present diplomatically and militarily, right? So major global powers like US, they have a global area of interest because they have the resources, they have the technology, the money, the budget, they have the manpower, right? So they project power everywhere in the world. But India can't afford to do that. We are still a developing nation with limited resources. So to optimize our resources and to use it efficiently, in order to protect our core national interests, we have defined a primary area of strategic interest. This area lies between the Strait of Hormuz, located over here, and the Strait of Malacca, located over here. Roughly, these two water bodies, these two straits, mark the boundaries of our area of strategic interest. So, roughly the area around it, this region, all right, roughly this region is our primary area of interest. Now, why have we chosen these points? What is so important about the Hormuz Strait and Malacca Strait? That's something you should understand. These straits, I hope you know what is a strait. You would have studied this in geography. A strait is a narrow water body that's connecting two larger water bodies. Like, look at the image here, the zoomed image. Hormuz Strait connects the strategic Persian Gulf with Gulf of Oman and Arabian Sea. Now, this is a critical shipping lane. It's one of the most important sea lanes of communication. It's one of the most important shipping routes, especially with regard to oil shipments. Because all your oil exporting countries, all the major oil exporting nations are present around the Persian Gulf, be it Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Oman, right? They're all centered around the Persian Gulf. All the oil shipments here passes through the Hormuz Strait and reaches Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean, right? Iran is also a major supplier. So given this importance for global oil markets and the energy security of India, Hormuz Strait and its stability is critical for us because there are a lot of tensions present here. This is a choke point. It's a maritime choke point. It's a strategic choke point. There are so many tensions here that it might result in a blockade of the strait. There are tensions between US and Iran, Israel and Iran. Until recently, there were very serious tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran. There are many civil wars going on, conflicts going on. There are many terror groups present in this region. One conflict, one attack might result in the disruption of shipment through Hormuz Strait. Or some powerful navy, like American Navy or Saudi armed forces or Iranian forces, they might block the Hormuz Strait to put pressure on the other country. Any such blockade will destabilize India. It will disrupt oil shipments. Oil prices will shoot up. Our import prices will increase. It will destabilize our economy and bring our economy to a standstill. So we have a great deal of dependency on Hormuz Strait. Similarly, to the east of India, the Malacca Strait is critical for India. It connects the Indian Ocean with the Pacific. It's another important shipping route that connects Andaman Sea and Bay of Bengal with South China Sea and forms a connection between Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. It's the most preferred shipping route that's present between Singapore and Indonesia. It's another strategic choke point. A lot of trade passes through Malacca Strait. Of course, you have other straits like Sunda Strait, Lombok Strait over here, but they are not preferred for shipping. It's not the ideal route. There are challenges for navigation through Sunda Strait and Lombok Strait. The most preferred shipping route here is the Malacca Strait. All right? Just like Hormuz Strait between Iran and UAE is critical for oil shipments from Persian Gulf to Arabian Sea, similarly, Malacca Strait is critical for global trade. Large part of global trade passes through Malacca Strait. Lot of India's exports imports passes through Malacca Strait. And this is another choke point. Tensions between India, China, US, and China might result in a blockade of Malacca Strait. This sea lane of communication might be blocked out, causing disruption that threatens India's economic stability and security. That is why these two choke points have been chosen as the reference points to define our primary area of interest. So the whole region around it, from Suez Canal in Egypt, there's another strait here, the Bab el Mandeb Strait, that connects the Red Sea with Arabian Sea. See, this here is Red Sea. This is your Red Sea. All right. Suez Canal connects Red Sea with Mediterranean Sea over here. All these are major shipping lanes. So Suez Canal in Egypt connects Mediterranean with the Red Sea. Red Sea is connected with the Arabian Sea over here through Bab el Mandeb Strait. This is the Bab el Mandeb Strait. Then the whole region here, from South Africa to East Africa, this region, Horn of Africa, right? This is the Horn of Africa. Please notice here. It looks like a horn of a rhinoceros. This is the Horn of Africa region. So East Africa, Horn of Africa, then Southern Africa, Indian Ocean, then Southeast Asia, all right, West Asia, and as well as Central Asia. These are the primary areas of interest for India. This is our immediate neighborhood, right? It not only includes South Asia, which is our immediate neighborhood, but the extended neighborhood is present here, right? West Asia, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Indian Ocean, Horn of Africa, East Africa, and Southern Africa. They are the key elements for Indian economy and its stability. We have historical ties with these regions, civilizational links with them. Today, our economy, our security is dependent on all these regions, which are part of our extended neighborhood. Roughly, it covers a diameter of around 2,000, 2,500 kilometers around India. Roughly. All right. So this block that you're seeing here, this is our primary area of interest. This is where Indian government agencies prioritize their resources and their budget. Be it Ministry of External Affairs, be it the Armed Forces of India, be it DRDO, ISRO, all these agencies, they focus on this region first. Right? In the satellites we develop, in the missiles that we develop, in the military modernization of India, the kind of aircraft carriers and vessels we procure, the submarines we procure, the aircrafts we procure, they're all procured keeping in mind the primary area of interest, which is between Hormuz Strait and Malacca Strait. Got it? This is the last key concept I wanted to explain as part of the first chapter. So this completes my detailed discussion. I hope you guys have liked it. Now I think we can take a short break. Let's take a 15 minutes break. It's almost 7:50. Let's come back at 8:05. All right, refresh yourselves, take a 15 minutes break, but please come back at sharp 8:05, because after the break, I'll be taking up the next chapter, India and its neighborhood. We'll be focusing on our relations with our neighboring countries. We'll pick countries one by one. All right. First, I'll give you a basic overview about South Asia, where India is located. We'll just have a small discussion on our neighborhood, where India is located. Then we'll start with our relations with our neighboring countries. Right? So I'll see you back at 8:05 in 15 minutes. I'll take some questions as well. Got it? So let's meet at 8:05 and continue the discussion. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the session. So, now that we have completed one chapter, the basic introductory chapter, let me take up all your questions and doubts for a few minutes, and then we'll start with the next chapter, that is India and its neighborhood. So, let's look at the questions first. Aditi is asking, why do we care about non citizens of India who are part of the diaspora? As I explained, whether they are Indian citizens or not doesn't matter. They are people of Indian origin. They're connected to India. There is a cultural, civilizational connect they share with India. And please don't forget, they are contributing to our country. If you're asking why we care about the Indian community, even if they are not Indian citizens, it's because they're contributing to our diplomacy. They're acting as our cultural ambassadors, as I told you. They are promoting our soft power influence, giving us leverage in foreign countries. They give us the ability to influence foreign governments and foreign societies because they are in influential positions. They are sending remittances back home to their families in India, right? They're contributing to Indian foreign policy, to the Indian economy. So it's only a duty of the Indian government to look after the well being of the Indian community, right? The government is not doing charity here. This is a duty, it's an obligation of the government to protect the safety and well being of Indian diaspora, both Indian citizens who are NRIs and as well as that of people of Indian origin. Next, Pratima is asking, is there any goal other than strategic goal, or simply goals of a country are called strategic goals? See, when we say strategic goals, usually it refers to goals related to security and defense of the nation, right? Like securing nuclear weapons, protecting our borders, tackling terrorism, defending our boundaries and sovereignty. They're all strategic goals. Anything related to security, defense becomes part of strategic goals. Then, even your long term goals, your long term economic goals, long term foreign policy objectives, they're also called strategic goals. Next, Shreyank is asking, sir, are we moving again towards a Cold War? In fact, we are not moving, we are already in another Cold War. Once the first Cold War ended in 91, another Cold War began between US and Russia. Then with the rise of China from early 2000, right, that's in the last 20 years, a Cold War rivalry has again started between US and China. So right now, we are already living in a Cold War era. It's called Cold War 2.0, 2.0, the second version of the Cold War, where US and Western countries have a rivalry with Russia and China, right? So yes, we are already living in a Cold War era. You see that geopolitical rivalry going on between Western countries and Russia and China. Next, Arshdeep is asking why all Central Asian countries have Stan in the name of their country, like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. That's because all Central Asian countries are Islamic nations. They are Muslim majority countries, and that is a part of the naming tradition as well, like Afghanistan, Pakistan, right? So all Central Asian countries being Islamic nations, you have that Stan in their name. Next, Pratima is asking, is there any international treaty that mandates countries with coastline to provide a passage to their neighboring landlocked countries? No, there is no such international treaty. If a landlocked country wants access to the sea, it has to bilaterally negotiate with the neighboring countries. This is left to the discretion of the neighbor. Like, for example, India is a good friend of Nepal. So we have given Nepal access to the sea. Let's say tomorrow our relations are affected. India wants to retaliate against Nepal. We can cut off the land access to Nepal. We can prevent Nepali exports and imports from reaching the sea by blocking the transit access we have given. So this is left to the discretion of each country. It's part of their bilateral ties. There's no international treaty that mandates that a country should give transit access. It's a matter of sovereignty, so countries can decide on their own. So that is why landlocked countries become so dependent. Unless and until they have good friendly relations, they won't be able to get transit access. Next, Neha is asking, sir, if in interview, if it is asked, how will you secure permanent seat for India in UN Security Council? How can we justify the statement as an IFS officer? See, you are jumping ahead. Don't worry, I will address this topic. We will come to UN reforms. In a later class, we will study UN reforms in detail. There, I will explain what India can do. Let's say such a question comes up regarding how India should push for a permanent seat. What will you do as a future diplomat? Right? I'll help you answer this question, but in a later class. Let's not jump ahead. Last question from Aditi. Does criticizing another country on their terrorist-like activities, like in Afghanistan or Myanmar, does it count as violation of our independent foreign policy of not interfering with another country's domestic affairs? See, first of all, in international relations, no country will stay out of the internal affairs of another country. It's a given fact that countries will interfere. India itself has interfered in Nepal, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, and in every other country. Please understand that independent foreign policy does not mean will not interfere in the affairs of another country. Interfering in the affairs of another country sometimes becomes essential to protect our interests. Independent foreign policy is different. It's about not listening to someone else. Now, US might tell us to impose sanctions on Myanmar. Now, why should we listen? Why should India listen to US with regard to our ties with Myanmar? Myanmar is our neighbor. We will decide how we will work with Myanmar. That is independent foreign policy. Please don't confuse the two. In geopolitics, countries will interfere. We might say we won't, but that is the reality. Every major power interferes in other countries. That is how they protect their interests. Coming to your other question, that would we criticize terror activities in Afghanistan or Myanmar? Yes, India criticizes all forms of terrorism, especially the terrorism that affects India. So terrorism present in Afghanistan, the instability in Myanmar does affect India. For example, the current crisis in Myanmar, the political security crisis in Myanmar, has a connection with the ethnic violence you have seen in Manipur. The two are connected. So obviously, we are concerned about the developments in Myanmar. We will express a position, a stand on that. The presence of terror groups in Pakistan and Afghanistan is a direct threat to India. So we do criticize that. We do take a direct stand. That is not a violation of our independent foreign policy. Independent foreign policy is deciding for ourselves. We will decide what is good for us. We will follow a policy that is good for our country, for our national interests. We will not listen to someone else. We will not blindly follow the orders of another country. That is called independent foreign policy. Next, Abhishek is asking, is hegemony a soft power? No. Please understand the meaning of hegemony. Hegemony means domination. Hegemony is where one big country, one powerful country, is imposing itself on a small country. Like US being a global power, imposing itself on small countries. Or sometimes India imposing itself on small neighboring countries. That is called hegemony. Hegemony, the word itself, means it's by force. You're dominating over another country, forcing another country to change their behavior. So that it can't be soft power, right? So hegemony is about domination, forcing others. It can't be soft power. Adarsh is asking, as all nations follow their own interests all the time, how do countries cooperate with each other? See, countries will cooperate with each other when they have common interests. See, every country, they do follow their national interests all the time. That is how it should be. Nothing wrong with that. As I told you, international relations is a little selfish, right? Countries look after their own self. I wouldn't say selfish. Even selfish is the wrong word. I would say countries are looking after their own self-interest. Nothing wrong with that. We all do that, right? At an individual level, all of us, we look after our self-interest first. Our family's interests, our society's interests, our community's interests, our country's interests. The same happens here as well. So when countries are looking after their self-interest, doesn't mean they can't cooperate. We can cooperate when you have common interests. Like, for example, India, Bangladesh have a common interest. We both benefit by connecting our countries, by connecting our roadways, railway lines, and water networks. Both India, Bangladesh will benefit economically. So it will serve the self-interest of both India and Bangladesh. So we will cooperate. We will sign a trade agreement with Australia, UAE, or another country to boost the trade between the two countries. It will benefit both the countries. That's a common interest. We will work with US in the defense domain, in the technology domain, because both the countries will benefit. So when you have common interests, those are the countries which align together. Those are the countries that work together. So it doesn't mean that when countries are following self-national interests, they don't cooperate at all. They do cooperate. That's what friendships are all about. Friendships are built on common interests. All right. So guys, these are the questions. We have spent a good 10 minutes on it. Now let's get back to the discussion. Let's start with the next chapter. In the next chapter, I'll be starting with the region-based approach, as I mentioned at the beginning. We'll be starting with South Asia, where India is located. This is India's neighborhood. This is where India is geographically located, and we share land and maritime borders with our immediate neighbors. So, in this chapter, we will thoroughly examine our ties with our neighboring countries in detail. We will spend a lot of time on this region. This is the most important topic to understand India's foreign policy. In this chapter, we'll not only cover our relations with our neighbors, we will be covering many related topics as well. Is that clear? So we will study our ties with Pakistan, Afghanistan, China, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. These are the 8 neighboring countries of India. Got it? Yes, even Afghanistan is a neighbor of India because we claim the whole state of Jammu and Kashmir as it existed in 1947. That is the correct position of India. It is Pakistan which has illegally occupied our territory. That is why we don't have a border with Afghanistan on the ground in reality. But to justify our position, our claim over the occupied areas, we should continue claiming that we have a boundary with Afghanistan. We share a border with Afghanistan. That's why if you look at the official map of India, if you look at government documents, if you look at India yearbook, you will notice that the government says India has a 96-kilometer border with Afghanistan near Wakhan corridor. It means that we are claiming this territory that Pakistan has occupied. Pakistan has illegally occupied these territories from India. So, technically speaking, and from India's point of view, Afghanistan is a neighbor of India. Right? On the ground, we may not have a direct boundary. Right? This whole area, Pakistan has occupied it. We can't connect with Afghanistan directly. But we still claim Afghanistan is a neighbor because that is how we justify our claims over the occupied areas of Kashmir. So all these 8 countries will be covered in detail. Now, before I continue, I want to explain one very important point. Today, if you look at South Asia and the geopolitics of South Asia, you will notice that the region is very volatile. There are a lot of tensions, disputes, and divisions. Across South Asia, there is large-scale communal polarization on religious lines. There is a strong religious divide in the region, right? In Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in India as well. There is a strong communal divide. There are ethnic divisions in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar. Myanmar is also our neighboring country. Please don't forget. Myanmar is not a South Asian country. It's a Southeast Asian country. Is that clear? Geographically, Myanmar is a Southeast Asian country, but it's an immediate neighbor of India. So we will cover this under the same chapter, India and its neighborhood. Got it? China as well is not part of South Asia. China is an East Asian country. But still we'll cover this because China is our neighbor. The chapter is India and its neighborhood. So with focus on South Asia, we'll cover all the neighboring countries. And the first thing we notice here in this region is that the region is volatile, filled with tensions, disputes, divisions, and conflict. The region has a history of conflict and wars. The region is devastated by terrorism, insurgency. Even economically, the region is affected by poverty, poor development, and lack of connectivity. There is very little connectivity between these countries. Generally, neighboring countries, they connect with each other by connecting their roads, their railway lines, and their water ways or water networks. They open the borders as well to promote border trade, to allow the movement of people, goods, and investments. But in South Asia, you don't see this happening, right? Movement of people is very difficult. Do you ever imagine going on a vacation to Pakistan or Bangladesh, right? You don't. Similarly, the nationals of other countries, the citizens of our neighboring countries, even they don't look at India as a tourist destination, most of them at least. There are many, many problems and challenges in this region, right? There is a lot of socio-economic backwardness, lack of education, lack of quality healthcare. There is poor development, hunger, poverty. In general, backwardness is a trademark of South Asia. It's one of the most unstable, volatile regions in the world. It has been affected by multiple wars and conflicts. There are standing border disputes, like the Kashmir dispute with India, Pakistan, the border dispute India has with Nepal, with China, right? The region has become a hub of terrorism, organized crime, and insurgency. From Afghanistan to Myanmar, from India to Sri Lanka, there have been many violent armed groups, insurgent terror organizations that have operated, which still continue to operate. So the question is, why has South Asia become like this? Was South Asia like this always? The answer is no. If you look at this region historically, if you look at the ancient times, this was a thriving civilization. I am referring to the Indian civilization. Please understand, I'm not referring to India, the country, India, the nation state. India is a country, is a new country. The concept of India is a very new concept, right? India came into existence from 1947 as a nation state. But I'm talking about the civilizational history of South Asia. This whole region that you're seeing here, from Afghanistan till Sri Lanka, from Myanmar till the Indian Ocean, this whole region was part of one thriving civilization. Just like the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, the Chinese civilization, and other major civilizations of the world, the Indian civilization, which has its roots in the Indus Valley, right, has always been a progressive and a thriving civilization. You look at our rich history, our history of 4,000 years. There have been many empires, kingdoms that have ruled across the subcontinent, right? From the Mauryas to Guptas, the Mughals, the Sultanates, other smaller kingdoms like, let's say, Vijayanagara Empire, the Travancore Kingdom, the Marathas, and many others. Despite being ruled by different kingdoms and empires, the region as a whole was part of one civilization. Even today, you find the common traits which actually connect us. Even today, we actually have strong cultural and people-to-people relations, right? Racially, we all look the same. Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Sri Lankans, Nepalis, pretty much we all look the same. We all pretty much eat the same food, celebrate pretty much the same festivals, play the same sports. So culturally, we are still very, very similar, but still we are very separated. We are divided. Correct? There are many documents, historical documents, to show that this was a thriving civilization at one point, which was part of one thriving progressive civilization. A lot of advancements happened here. There were advancements in art and culture, in governance, administration, in economic prosperity, right? Indian civilization was a self-sustaining civilization. But from such a rich region, from such a rich civilization, today we have been reduced to an unstable region, a volatile, backward region filled with conflicts, disputes, wars, and terrorism, filled with divisions between religions, divisions between castes, ethnic groups, linguistic groups. So, what could be responsible for this? Is there any factor which has contributed to the divisions you have today in South Asia? If you try to find an answer to this question, you will notice that there is one common answer. There is one factor which is seen as the root of all these problems. It is the colonial blunders that were committed under colonial rule. I want you guys to understand this very, very clearly. See, since ancient medieval times, this Indian civilization, even though it had its own internal divisions, it was never divided internally on a large scale. Of course, different religions have thrived here. You have your non-Abrahamic faiths that took root here, like Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism. Then Abrahamic faiths entered, right, with foreign conquests and invasions. Islam, Christianity, later Judaism, Zoroastrianism all entered India, and multiple religions have thrived here. That is the beauty of the Indian civilization. It's been a very tolerant, diverse civilization, right? Diversity is the inherent feature and strength of the Indian civilization, and even today, the strength of Indian democracy is its diversity. It's the secularism of the Indian society, which is the strength of the country. But historically, of course, there would be divisions on all these lines, all these social lines. But these were never large-scale divisions. There were divisions between Hindus and Muslims, divisions between Hindus and Buddhists, caste-based division between the upper caste and the Dalits. Different regional divisions were there. But still, the civilization was one whole, having a common culture, common traits, common interests that bound them together. But this was permanently destroyed by colonial rule, by almost 3-4 centuries of colonial rule, right? Beginning with the Portuguese, then the Dutch, the French, and finally the British, especially the British rule. It's the British rule which destroyed the subcontinent, because they adopted the policy of divide and rule to continue their domination over the colony. India was their prized asset, right? The Indian colony that stretched across this region was their biggest asset. This is what powered their industrial revolution. They looted raw materials from India. They destroyed India's agricultural system. They destroyed our native economy, destroyed handicrafts, cottage industries. India was a thriving, self-sufficient economy, one of the top exporters since ancient medieval times. From that position, we were devastated and destroyed to become a dependent, which was dependent on imports from Europe, imports from Britain. They would loot raw materials and resources from India, power their growth, their technological industrial growth in Europe, dump the goods on the Indian market. India thus became a dependent country. Our agriculture was destroyed. Our industrial society was destroyed. Since ancient medieval times, Indian civilization has been an industrial society, a self-sustaining society. This was destroyed by the British. The economy was destroyed. The pride of India was hurt. The Indian identity, the civilizational identity was hurt. Different communities were targeted, be it Hindus or Muslims or tribes, the Dalits. No one was spared by the British rule. And their only agenda was to continue their domination over the colony, especially after 1857. After the first war of Indian independence, they realized that if different communities united in their freedom struggle, then Britain could no longer rule India. They would lose their prized colony. So after 1857, the British cultivated a deliberate policy of divide and rule to drive divisions, to exploit the social divisions, to create internal fighting. They divided Hindus and Muslims on religious lines. They promoted communal polarization as a matter of policy. They would encourage radical elements on all the sides. They divided the Sinhalas and Tamils in Sri Lanka. They played a direct role in the communalization of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Today, if you find strong communal divisions in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, it's because of colonial policy of divide and rule, where they divided the Hindu-Muslim communities. The border disputes you have, the wars which have happened, the terrorism that you see here, they all trace back to colonial origin, the colonial blunders that were committed. Is that clear? Now, this is a key point, a very important analysis that I want you guys to understand before I start with the chapter. Because in the next topic, right, we'll start with bilateral relations. I'll pick one neighboring country after the other, like Nepal, then Bhutan, and others, and we'll discuss all the neighboring countries. In every chapter, you will notice that the major issues and conflicts of today, they're all of colonial origin. Be it the Kashmir dispute that we have with Pakistan, the border dispute with China, the issues we have with Nepal, the issue of terrorism and communal divisions, problems in Myanmar, problems in Sri Lanka, problems in Bangladesh, they all have a common root, which is the disastrous policies of British rule in India. Is that clear? You will see this pattern throughout this discussion, throughout this chapter. All right? So that is the introduction I wanted to give. With this, we can start with the first bilateral relation of India with our neighbor Nepal. I'll be starting with the Himalayan countries. Let us look at the Himalayan states, that is Nepal and Bhutan. Today and tomorrow, we are going to understand India's relations with these two important Himalayan states, that is Nepal and Bhutan. Let's begin with India-Nepal relations. Now, I want you guys to concentrate. I hope all of you have kept a book, writing down some key points as short notes. Also, keep an atlas with you, right? If not today, at least by tomorrow, try to get an atlas or even use Google Maps if you're comfortable with it. Because maps are very, very important in international relations. Geopolitics, we just studied, it's all about geography. To understand the history of a place, the politics of a place, the economy of a place, geography is everything. All right? So in every chapter, I'll be using a lot of maps. I'll be marking some key locations. All of this is very important for your prelims and even for your general understanding. You'll not get a deeper understanding of the topic without being strong in map reading. So please focus on this. Let's start with the strategic location of Nepal. As far as India is concerned, Nepal, even though it's a small country, right? It's a strategic country for us because of its geographical location. As I mentioned, it's a Himalayan state. And you can see here in the map, it is sandwiched between the two major Asian powers, India and China. That is why Nepal occupies a strategic location. Is that clear? It is sandwiched between India and China. Now, please note down the Indian states that share the international border with Nepal. This again is important for your prelims. UPSC might ask a prelims question. Which of the following states share borders with Nepal? Similarly, for all neighboring countries, you should prepare. You should know the neighboring states, the border states of India, which share the international boundary with our neighbors like Pakistan, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and China, and Nepal. All right? Please look at the map. The border states with Nepal are Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, and Sikkim. These are the Indian states sharing a direct land border with Nepal. To the north of Nepal, you have Tibet. This here is Tibet, which was annexed by China, occupied by China in 1950. Until 1950, Tibet was an independent kingdom. This Himalayan kingdom was annexed and occupied by China forcefully in the year 1950. So basically, overnight, China became a neighbor of Nepal, India, Sikkim, and even Bhutan. This is a very important part of history. Otherwise, without the annexation of Tibet, China wouldn't have been our neighbor. China was a remote East Asian country. Mainland China was far away from India. But when People's Republic of China was established, the PRC, under the Communist Party, right? It was established in 1949. Immediately after its establishment, the PRC, the People's Republic of China, as it's officially known, it started displaying expansionist behavior. It became an aggressive power. It showed tendency to expand its territory by occupying others' territories. And China expanded its territory by annexing Tibet and even Xinjiang. That is how China became a neighbor, a Himalayan neighbor for India, Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan. Please understand, Sikkim was an independent country as well before it merged with India. Sikkim joined India much later in 1975. Until then, it was a protectorate state of India, right? You'll study this in modern history and in polity as well. So Sikkim was an independent kingdom that later merged with India in 1975. Until then, it was just a protectorate state of India. So these Himalayan states you see here, all these Himalayan kingdoms, they were all monarchies. Bhutan, Nepal, Sikkim, they were all monarchies. These three Himalayan states, they felt threatened. They got worried when China annexed Tibet. If China could occupy a large kingdom like Tibet, Tibet was a very large kingdom. If Tibet could be annexed, then Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan didn't stand a chance in front of China. So all these Himalayan states were alarmed. They were worried when China annexed Tibet in 1950. India also had similar concerns. India got worried, India got concerned regarding the expansionist behavior of China. China was clearly becoming an aggressive expansionist power, and India saw China as a threat because now China had become our neighbor by occupying Tibet. From Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh, we would share a boundary. This boundary was with Tibet before, but now that China occupied Tibet, it became the India-China border, right? So India also had similar concerns about Chinese intentions. Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan also had similar concerns about Chinese intentions. This is what drove these countries together. They all sought India's help and support. Nepal, Bhutan, and Sikkim, which was also an independent protectorate state. They all perceived a common threat from Chinese aggression, and they sought India's help and assistance, particularly to defend their territory. Because they couldn't stand up against Chinese aggression. They knew they didn't have the resources. But India was a large power, a large country, right? So they sought India's protection, India's support, especially in the field of defense and strategic ties. So from 1949, 1950, India has cultivated these countries as the buffer states of India. We continued the British policy of treating these Himalayan kingdoms as buffer states. What do you mean by a buffer? Buffer is like a cushion, like a extra protection. Like Food Corporation of India maintains a buffer stock, right? It maintains an extra stock to manage supplies, manage prices of food grains. That acts like a cushion to deal with any emergency, to deal with any shortage. Similarly, in geopolitics, right? Buffer states, they act like a barrier. They act like a cushion to absorb any external impact. Back in 1800s, Britain perceived a threat from Russia to the Indian colony. Is that clear? Back in the 1800s, for Britain, India was their prized asset, their biggest colony, biggest resource. So Britain had reasons to believe that Russia might threaten Britain's control over India from the north. Right? There were expectations, there were intelligence reports for Britain that Russia might plan an attack to capture the Indian colony. Right? Based on this threat, Britain decided to create buffers to the north of India. That is towards the Himalayan belt, where the geography is already complicated because of the Himalayan terrain. Britain decided to develop all the kingdoms as independent buffer states. That's why Britain never occupied these kingdoms. That's why Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, they were never part of British India. Right? Even Ladakh, the princely state of Ladakh, they were all kept independent by the British. Even though they had defeated them, right? They signed agreements with all the kingdoms. be it with the Nepali kingdom, the Bhutanese kingdom, the Tibetan kingdom. They signed agreements with them, gave them autonomy, gave them independence in return for loyalty. So these kingdoms could act like a buffer for British India against any possible Russian threat from the north. That was the buffer strategy of Britain, right? To protect the Indian colony, these Himalayan kingdoms, they were cultivated as buffer states back in 1800s. They were given their autonomy, given their independence. Britain never occupied them, but in return for loyalty and protection. So they could act as a barrier, as an outside barrier. Now, after independence, India continued the buffer strategy. We continue to cultivate Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan as buffer states for India, but this time threat was not from Russia. The threat was from China. The rising expansionism and its aggressive behavior of China became a threat for India. All the small Himalayan kingdoms, they ran to India for help and protection because they feared Chinese aggression. This is what brought India closer to these Himalayan states, and we built very close strategic ties focused on defense and security and other aspects of the relationship. So we do share a very, very close relationship with Nepal. Is that clear? Now, let me tell you something else about the geography of Nepal. Please make a note. If you look at the physical geography of Nepal, the Himalayan mountains are largely present in the north and central parts of Nepal. All right? This is the mountainous area, the Pahadi region. The Pahadi region, where you have the mighty Himalayan mountains that acts as a barrier, a geographical barrier that cuts off the subcontinent from China and Central Asia. All right? So the people who reside here, the ethnic groups who are found in the hilly areas, they are called the Pahadis, the Pahadi community. And Pahadis have been dominant in Nepal. They are the dominant class. Understood? Pahadis are the dominant class here. See, until recently, Nepal was a monarchy. It was ruled by a king. And it was also a theological state. Meaning, I hope you know what's a theological state. Meaning the state had an official religion. Any country which has an official state religion, that's called a theological state. Like Pakistan. Pakistan is an Islamic nation. Similarly, Nepal was a Hindu state, the only Hindu state in the world. So it was a theological monarchy. So the Pahadis from the Himalayan belt, they have been close to the royal family. So they are the dominant class in Nepal. Even today in Nepal's politics, in Nepal's society and economy, it's the Pahadis who are always dominant. All right? So this is the geography in the north of Nepal. You have the Himalayan terrain, the Pahadi region, which is a very difficult geography. So it's not easy to create infrastructure, not easy to carry out construction because of the Himalayan geography. And here you have a community called the Pahadis, who are the dominant class, who have been historically close to the monarchy, to the royal family. In southern Nepal, that is over here, this belt, which I'm highlighting, the southern part of Nepal, this is called the Terai region or the Terai belt. Is that clear? The Terai belt or the Terai region. This is the plain area, the plains of Nepal. It extends from Nepal towards India, that is towards UP and Bihar. The Terai of Nepal, the Terai region, the plain area of Nepal in the southern parts of the country, extends into India towards UP and Bihar. So here in the Terai, you find a community called the Mades community, the Madesi people or Madesis. Madhesis are very, very close to India. Madhesis are Nepalese essentially, found in the Terai region. But they are very close to India because they share marital, familial relations on the other side of the border. The Madhesis of Nepal, they marry into families on the Indian side. They establish a marital relationship by marrying into Indian families. Is that clear? In the border villages of UP and Bihar, in the Terai, the families are connected across the border. So Nepali Madhesis are closely connected. There is a familial relationship, marital bond formed through marriage between the border villages of India in UP, Bihar and the border villages of Nepal. So Madhesis are a common connection for us. But Madhesis have always felt oppressed at the hands of the dominant Pahadis. There is a divide in Nepal between Madhesis and the Pahadis. Pahadis who have been dominant, rich, and influential, they've often dominated and oppressed and discriminated against the Madhesi community. Madhesis have always felt left out. Madhesis have felt they haven't got equal representation, equal opportunity, and there is a constant divide in Nepal between Madhesis and the Pahadis. Is that clear? Please understand this aspect of geography of Nepal, the physical and human geography of Nepal. This is what defines the politics of Nepal and directly influences our relations with the country. Understood? That is the essence of geopolitics. Now, let's look at the next slide here. Please look at the map that I've shared on the other side, on the right corner, right top corner. You can notice that Nepal is a landlocked country. As I mentioned earlier, it's a landlocked nation surrounded by India and China, correct? Now, Nepal has a great deal of dependency on India primarily for economic reasons. It has a lot of economic dependency on India. So India has recognized this dependency of Nepal, and in order to cultivate good relations, we have given sea access to Nepal. That is, Nepali goods can pass via Indian territory. Nepali traders, they can make use of Indian territory from across the border. They can carry their goods through Indian territory to the ports of India located on the east coast, like Kolkata, Paradip, Vishakhapatnam. These eastern ports of India, they have been opened for Nepal. We have given them transit access via Indian territory, Indian land, and they can use the Indian ports to trade with rest of the world. Is that clear? So Nepal's economy is heavily dependent on India. Even essential supplies are largely sent from India. Nepal has a very limited economy. It's a very poor country. It's a backward country as well. It has faced a lot of challenges in the past, political challenges, social challenges, right? So its economy is not very strong. Nepal has a very weak economy. It suffers from poverty as well. And it's affected by disasters, multiple disasters, especially earthquakes, landslides, floods, because Himalayas is very vulnerable to disasters. Just yesterday, there was a major earthquake in Nepal, which affected India as well, right? You might have read that in news. So Nepal has a great deal of economic dependency on India, not just for trading with rest of the world, not just for port access, but even for essential supplies. Nepal does not produce much on its own. So basic food supplies, medicines, equipment, then fuel supplies, petrol, diesel, kerosene, even power supply, everything largely is sent from India. India is the primary supplier of all essential goods, items, and supplies for Nepal. So there is a great deal of economic dependency here. Is that clear? Now, the other important point, the third point. The first was from a strategic perspective, right? The India China angle. That was the first point that I discussed. Let me mention that as well. The first point with regard to defense and strategic ties, how India has cultivated Nepal and other Himalayan states as a buffer, as part of the buffer strategy against China. Second is about Nepal's economic dependency on India. The third is the close cultural link. There is a very strong civilizational bond that binds India and Nepal together. The link is through Hinduism and Buddhism, both. Historically, since ancient times, Hinduism and Buddhism has been a common connect. Correct? There are many important Hindu pilgrimage sites in Nepal. You might have heard of Janakpur, which is believed to be the birthplace of Sita Mata according to Indian mythology. Right? There are many pilgrimage sites, Hindu pilgrimage sites associated with Mahabharata, Ramayana that are present in Nepal. That forms a common connection. Then Lord Gautam Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, right? He was born in today's Nepal at Lumbini. Lumbini is present in Nepal. There are many important sites, Buddhist sites in Nepal, like historical places like Kapilavastu, Lumbini, and others. There are many Buddhist heritage sites in India, like Bodh Gaya, Sarnath, Kushinagar. So across UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, right? There are many Buddhist sites in India that forms a strong connection between India and Nepal. So through Hinduism and Buddhism, the people of two countries have been very closely linked and connected since historical times. This people to people relationship, it predates the nation state of India and Nepal. Even before India and Nepal were created, much before that, hundreds of years ago, this close cultural and civilizational bond and link existed between the people of both the sides. Is that clear? So given these connections, it was very essential to build a strong relationship. And that is why India and Nepal have established a system of open borders. This is one unique aspect about the relationship. India and Nepal have fully open borders. This is the only open border of India. Now, what do you mean by an open border? I'm sure many of you may not know this. An open border means there are no border controls. When you try to cross the border to another country, you'll always have border controls. There will be security forces guarding the border. There will be immigration checks at ports of entry, like airports, seaports, and land ports. Only those who have a valid visa issued by the other country, only they are allowed entry into the other country. Now, let's say you want to go to US to study or as a tourist. You think US will simply allow you inside their country? No, they won't, because there is a hard border between India and US. There is a hard border between India and Pakistan, India and Sri Lanka, right? There are security checks. There are security forces who keep a check on the movement of people, goods, etc. There is a visa process. You have to obtain legal visas to gain entry into the other country. That's what you mean by border controls. But countries which are very close to each other, which are close friends, which have a lot of trust on each other, they will eliminate border controls in order to provide for free movement. To provide for free movement of people, goods, and vehicles. This is a unique system we have created to nurture the close people to people connections that we have, the deep rooted civilizational relationship that we have with Nepal. So Indians can enter Nepal without a visa. You don't need a visa. You don't even have to carry your passport, right? A basic identification, filling few forms is enough. you'll be given entry into Nepal. Similarly, Nepalis can enter India without a visa. We don't have hard border controls. Even the security forces, they are under restrictions. They can't carry heavy weapons. The border guarding force, they can't carry heavy weaponry. They are prohibited from opening fire. That is how you create a free movement regime. Is that clear? So we have created such a system of open borders with Nepal. The main reason is to facilitate this economic, strategic, cultural relationship. Since Nepal has so much dependency on India, lot of goods are sent from India. Lot of vehicles keep moving between the two countries. If there are hard border controls, it will delay the movement of goods. It will increase the cost of transportation. And Nepal is going to suffer as it's a small country. And if hard borders are created, it will affect the movement of people. It will affect the cultural ties, the familial relations, the business relations. It will affect the movement of tourists, businessmen, investors, and as a result, economic and cultural ties will take a hit. That is why we have not created a hard border. We have created an open border system to facilitate this unique relationship. Is that clear? Now, do you know of any such region, or do you know any example where such open borders exist in the world? Can you let me know in the comments? Are you aware of any such open border system anywhere in the world? Very good. European Union is the perfect example. The European Union also has an open border system. Have you heard of the Schengen visa? Right? European Union countries, EU members, they have an agreement called the Schengen Agreement. So those who are part of the Schengen zone, they have a common visa system called the Schengen visa. So for outsiders like Indians, let's say we have to go to EU countries, you have to get a Schengen visa. And once you get a Schengen visa, you can get access to all the EU countries. And within EU, the member states, they don't need visa at all. Like, for example, a French citizen, if he wants to go to Germany, he can simply travel. He can take a plane or a train or a bus or his own vehicle, drive across the border. No one will check, no one will stop them, no one will ask for documents. That is the true open border system that provides for free movement of people, goods, services, investments, and vehicles. That is how you promote integration, regional integration through your foreign policy. So such a special arrangement exists between India and Nepal to promote the close economic, strategic, cultural ties. In fact, there is a joke amongst Indian diplomats. They say that India-Nepal relationship is like roti beti ke sambandh. Informally, they joke about India-Nepal relations. They say that it's a roti beti ke sambandh, meaning roti means bread. Roti means bread, which is a reference to livelihood. Beti here refers to the marital bond created through marriage, where Madesi men from Nepal marry girls from Indian villages from UP and Bihar in the Terai belt. Right? It shows that Nepalis are dependent on India for their education, for their jobs, for their livelihood. You see that many Nepali students are settled in Indian cities, studying in Indian colleges, Indian universities. They can even compete in our government exams, including your UPSC exam. Indian Army has a dedicated regiment, the Gorkha Regiment, where Nepali Gorkhas are given preference. Right? In various government examinations held by the government of India, Nepali nationals are eligible. We have given national treatment. We have extended national treatment to each other, to the citizens of both countries. In almost every major Indian city, town, Nepali workers can be found. Right? They take up various jobs, various employment in the country, and that is their big source of livelihood because Nepal does not have enough job opportunities. So Nepali citizens, they depend on India for education and as well as for jobs and livelihood. And this has been facilitated. We have a special arrangement through the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. This is the foundation of India-Nepal relations. The India-Nepal relations were cemented in 1950 with the signing of this historic treaty. Even today, this is the defining aspect of our relations. It is this treaty which creates open borders between the two countries. It is under this treaty that both countries have given national treatment to each other's citizens. Meaning, Indian citizens will be treated like Nepali citizens inside Nepal, and vice versa. India promises to treat Nepali citizens as our own citizens in terms of residency, employment, trade, education, for ownership of businesses, etc. In these domains, both countries are giving national treatment to citizens of the other country. That's why Nepali citizens can settle down in India. They can take a job in India. They can compete in government exams, including your UPSC exam, your banking exams, right? Indian investors get the same treatment. They are treated just like Nepali investors. So this national treatment has been made possible under the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. This is the foundation of the treaty which created the open borders, and both countries have extended national treatment to each other. Under the treaty, there is a provision through which India can play a role in the defense of Nepal. We can provide weapons, and play a role in the security of Nepal. In fact, there was a point where Indian troops were stationed in Nepal back in 1960s, right? When Nepal was threatened by China, when Nepal faced a threat from China, Indian troops were present. We would provide them military training, supply weapons to them. We would even jointly patrol the border between Nepal and China. So close military relations have formed. Both sides have promised under the treaty to respect each other's sovereignty, each other's territorial integrity. They have agreed to open up their borders. They have agreed to give each other national treatment. So this treaty is the foundation of this relationship. Is that clear? Now, before I proceed any further, does anyone know which is the border guarding force of India that is responsible for protecting this border with Nepal? We have deployed a specific force. A specific border guarding force is deployed here. Do you know which force is it? Some are saying BSF, ITBP. Both are incorrect. Hariom and Naman. Only two of them. And Kamlesh, Shubhajit, Akanksha. Only these students have got the right answer. The border guarding force is SSB, the Sashastra Seema Bal. SSB is the designated border guarding force from India to protect the India-Nepal border. They are restricted from carrying heavy weapons and opening fire, but it is their responsibility to deal with all the security threats and maintain the stability and security of this sensitive border. All right. So now that you know what is the basis of India-Nepal relations, let us proceed with the discussion. Let's look at the other aspects of the relationship, especially the modern relations that have developed between India and Nepal. Now, before I start talking about the recent developments of the last 20 years, I want you guys to have a basic overview of the historical relations. As I mentioned, Nepal was a theological monarchy from 1947 to 2006. That is from India's independence. I'm taking India's independence as a reference point because Nepal's independence predates that. It was always an independent kingdom even under the British. The British never annexed Nepal, right? So Nepal had maintained its independence, and since India became independent, both countries established very close, friendly relations. India was very close to the monarchy. The Rana dynasty, the Rana clan, was the royal family which ruled Nepal, the Nepali kingdom, right? And it was a Hindu state, a theological state. So there was no democracy as such. It was not a constitutional democracy. It was not a secular republican state as such. It was a theological monarchy. So India was very close to Nepal. The Treaty of 1950 formed the basis, the foundation, and we provided a lot of economic assistance. From 1950s, 1960s itself, we took up many projects in Nepal. We funded many projects. We gave them military training, supplied weapons, right? And India became the key supplier of all essential items. So, because of Nepal's dependency on India and the close cultural links, strong relations developed, and this remained for a very long time. Both sides trusted each other a lot. There was a lot of faith in the relationship. But for the first time, it was disrupted in 1975. In 1975, there was a disruption when Sikkim merged with India. It was alleged that the merger of Sikkim was forced by India. All right, we need not go into the details. It's all part of the historical background. The additional notes will cover these points, these factual historical points. It's not too relevant in today's context, but you should just have an idea regarding this. So when Sikkim merged with India in 1975, it was alleged that India had played a role. India had interfered in Sikkim. India had destabilized Sikkim, forcing the merger of the Chogyal dynasty into India. The Chogyal dynasty was ruling over Sikkim. The allegation was India's intelligence agency, RAW, the Research and Analysis Wing, which is India's foreign intelligence agency, was allegedly blamed for destabilizing the Chogyal kingdom that forced the Sikkim's merger with India. This was the allegation. India has denied it. But this merger of Sikkim under controversial circumstances created doubts for Nepal about India's intentions. Now, Nepal believed that if India could destabilize a kingdom like Sikkim, which is also a small Himalayan kingdom, Nepal also feared India might do the same, that India might meddle, interfere in Nepal and force its merger with India someday. These doubts and suspicions created a division, a divide in the relationship. Slowly, Nepal started getting closer to China. In 1970s, 1980s, Nepal started getting closer to China, which created the first divide in the relationship. Then, Nepal was devastated by a civil war. Nepal was hit by a major civil war led by the Nepali Maoists. The Maoist extremist ideology from China had spread to Nepal. It had spread to India as well. Right? The Naxal movement in India is nothing but the Maoist movement. So just like the Maoist movement had spread to India and created a security challenge in India, similarly, Maoist outfits started rising in 1990s. This triggered a major civil war in Nepal that lasted from 1995 to 2006. And India played a role in mediating between the two sides. And we worked out a peace agreement called the 12-point peace agreement to bring the civil war to an end. Since India was very influential, right? We had good ties with Nepal's government, Nepal's armed forces. We built contacts with the Maoist rebels as well. By using our influence, we tried to stabilize Nepal because India cannot afford instability in the neighborhood. There were rumors, there were allegations that the Maoist war in Nepal was sponsored by China. Apparently, China, which is the origin of Maoist ideology, which is a left-wing extremist ideology, was seen to be sponsoring the Maoist outfits in Nepal. All right? Right now, don't worry what is Maoism. I'll explain that under internal security. We have a separate subject. Under internal security, we will study Maoism in detail. We have a separate topic for that. All right? Just understand it's a left-wing extremist ideology, a violent extremist ideology that's originated from China. Today's Chinese government, the PRC, the People's Republic of China, is built on Maoist ideology. The Communist Party of China is built on Maoism. It's a violent extremist ideology that triggered Naxalism in India. It spread to Nepal as well, triggering the civil war. And India believed that China was responsible to spread the ideology. So, to counter the Chinese influence, India acted as a mediator. We worked with Nepal's government, the armed forces, gave them support in the war. Apparently, we worked with the Maoists as well to bring them to the negotiating table. And we successfully mediated a peace agreement, the 12-point peace agreement, in 2006 that brought the civil war to an end. So India successfully ended the civil war by negotiating between the two sides, and following this, Nepal transitioned into a democracy. By then, Nepal's monarchy had weakened. Internally, within the royal family, there was a crisis in 2001. Nepal's monarchy had declined. Like, a lot of the social divisions had come up where monarchy was being opposed. So this led to a change, a political constitutional change. And from 2006 to 2008, Nepal transitioned to become a democracy. It became a republican, democratic, secular state from a theological monarchy. All right, this was a major change that happened, and India played a direct role in this. India not only brought the civil war to an end by mediating between Nepali government and the Maoists, but we also helped Nepal in transitioning to a democracy from a theological monarchy. So this meant that now Nepal needed a new constitution. Nepal would need a new constitution to provide for these changes. Correct? A new constitution had to be drafted. This is where the problems began. From 2008 till 2015, for 7 years, the constitution making process was delayed and dragged. It took 7 years for Nepal to finalize and adopt a new constitution. It was only in 2015, in September 2015, that Nepal adopted its new constitution. But during these 7 years, from 2008 to 2015, there was a lot of chaos and turmoil inside Nepal. A constituent assembly had been set up to draft the constitution. A government also had been set up. But the problem was there was a division inside Nepal. All right? And because of this social division, the constitution making process got dragged for 7 years. There were repeated delays. Multiple changes happened in the government. Governments fell and new governments were formed. New constituent assemblies were formed. And this entire process of drafting a new constitution became very chaotic in Nepal. Now, why am I mentioning all this? Why is it relevant? It is relevant because it was alleged that India was excessively interfering in the constitution making process. India was blamed by certain sections in Nepal that India was interfering with the constitution making process and thus breaching the sovereignty of Nepal. Is that clear? So let's understand what happened. Let's understand what the issue is all about. It's a very important topic. Remember, I told you that there is a major social division in Nepal between Pahadis and the Madhesis. The Madhesis, as I told you, they felt discriminated, oppressed, and left out. They were demanding inclusive, equitable representation in the new Nepali parliament. They basically wanted the question of federalism to be addressed. The Madhesis, who have historically faced discrimination at the hands of Pahadis and the royal family, they wanted more states to be created in the Terai region. If more states are created, It will increase representation in the Nepali parliament. Understood? It will fetch them more seats in the Nepali parliament, which would give them inclusive and equitable representation to look after the welfare of the Madhesi community. This was the demand of Madhesis and as well as the Janjatis. Janjatis are the tribal communities. So the tribal communities, the Janjatis and Madhesis, they had one demand. Their demand was they wanted more seats in the new parliament, which means they will have equitable, inclusive representation. For that, they wanted more states to be created in the Terai region. If more states are created, representation will increase for Terai, which means more Madhesi members can get elected to the new parliament. This was their major demand, along with few other minor demands. But Pahadis within various political parties, they opposed these provisions. Pahadis who have dominated Nepal's politics, they wouldn't agree to the demand of Madhesis. So basically, Madhesi demands were not met. Despite repeated protests, repeated demands, their concerns were never addressed by various political parties, including Nepali Congress, the Communist Party of Nepal, and other factions of the Communist Party. These are major parties in Nepal. They were part of the Constituent Assembly, but they were dominated by the Pahadis. They would never agree to the demands of the Madhesis. This was the major divide. Is that clear? These parties, right, which were all dominated by Pahadi community, they wanted a constitution that would favor Pahadis, not the Madhesis. They were against creating more states in Terai. They were against giving more seats to Madhesis and Janjatis in the parliament. This is what led to the delay of 7 years. During this entire process, India was involved. As you can expect, India expressed concern for the well-being of Madhesis. Why? Because Madhesis are connected to us. They share marital familial bonds in UP and Bihar. And this is a big electoral issue as well. It's connected to the electoral dynamics in UP and Bihar. All right? And also it's a moral obligation. It's not just about electoral politics. Madhesis are connected to Indian families. So naturally, Indian government will be concerned about their welfare. There's nothing wrong with that. It's all about whether you'll be idealistic or pragmatic, right? Idealism says that, yes, Madhesis have been wronged. That is true. It's a fact. Madhesis have been discriminated. They've largely been left behind. So on moral grounds, on humanitarian grounds, India might stand up for them. India might say that, please give them equal rights, give them equal representation. But again, there will be a consequence of doing that. If India interferes in the internal matters of another country, even though it's a right position, ideally it is correct, right? We are standing for principles, values, correct. But it might affect your relations. Your pragmatic interests, realist interests might get affected. That is exactly what happened in Nepal. Because nobody likes interference in their internal issues. Now tomorrow, let's say, your relatives will interfere in your family matter. Right? No one likes that. No one likes external interference. Even if they are doing it out of good interest, no one will like any external interference. The same happens in geopolitics. Even though India wanted to support Madhesis, which was ideally a correct position, because Madhesis are connected to us, we have a cultural bond with them. So if a community is being oppressed, right, India as a major power has to stand up for them. That's an idealistic policy. But you have to think of pragmatism, think of realistic policy as well. If you stand up for them, if you try to interfere in their constitution making process, they will see this as your interference. They will see this as India's imposition, right? They'll see this as India's hegemony, which is being imposed on a small country like Nepal. And they will not like that. So within Nepal's political parties, strong anti-India sentiments started developing. Anti-India sentiments started developing on the allegation that India was always meddling in Nepal. First of all, doubts were created when Sikkim merged with India in 1975. Then Nepal tried getting closer to China, which India tried to counter. Then the civil war, the Maoist civil war, where India mediated a settlement. And now India's interference in constitution making process, asking for equal representation, equal rights for Madhesis. So this stand of India, right, even though it was seen to favor Madhesis, it affected our ties with the other major political parties and the Pahadis. And many politicians, they exploited this to their advantage. Because see, Nepalis are very proud of their identity. There's a very strong nationalistic pride that Nepalis associate with their identity. Obviously, if they see that a major power like India is meddling, interfering, and imposing, some of them are going to reject it. And some of the politicians, they might exploit this to their advantage. That is what happened, which derailed our ties with Nepal. Is that clear? What happened was, after 7 years of delay because of the Madhesi issue, finally, a new constitution was adopted. By 2015, a final constitution was brought out, and Nepali Constituent Assembly adopted this constitution as well. But India was not happy with it. Madhesis were not happy with it because Madhesi demands were not met. Madhesi demands were not met. They were not given more states. They were not given more seats in the parliament. Immediately, Madhesis, they protested. They carried out a mass agitation and they imposed an economic blockade along the border. Since Terai region is in the border where Madhesis are strong and dominant, they blocked the roads between India and Nepal. They protested against the new constitution because their concerns, their rights, their demands were not met. This agitation by Madhesis resulted in an economic blockade of Nepal because roads between India and Nepal were blocked along the open border, thus disrupting the movement of goods. The movement of essential supplies were affected. So Nepal's economy took a massive hit. Nepal's economy took a major hit because of this economic blockade. And some of the Nepali politicians who have built support on nationalistic lines by promoting Nepali identity, they exploited the situation and they blamed India for the entire crisis. They alleged that India was the one which was supporting Madhesi agitation. They said India is interfering in the sovereign rights of the country to frame its constitution. And they said India is encouraging Madhesis, as India is close to Madhesis. They allege that India is using Madhesis to impose a blockade to punish Nepal economically. India denied the allegation. India said we have no role in this, but Madhesis were doing it on their own because their rights have not been provided, their demands have not been addressed. But this crisis, right, ended up helping these politicians of Nepal, some of them. They created even more anti-India sentiments, right? It had existed for many years. Now it became even more stronger. And they started playing the China card to get closer to China in order to offset India. China also was looking for a major opening into Nepal to counter India. India has always been a dominant influence, but China has major interests in Nepal. We are going to study that tomorrow. In the next class, we will discuss China's interest in Nepal. Why is China so interested? From 1970s, 1980s, China has tried to meddle. It has tried to undermine and counter Indian influence. Right? That's what explains China's sponsorship of the Maoist movement. Right? It has taken up many other steps in Nepal to undercut Indian influence. So some of these Nepali politicians who had built their political support on Nepali nationalism, Nepali identity, They allege that India is always meddling. India is the one supporting Madhesis to carry out the blockade, which is hurting Nepal economically. There was a shortage of essential items. Prices increased. Common Nepalis were getting affected. So these politicians exploited the situation by blaming India, and they not only promoted anti-India sentiments, but they started getting closer to China. So India had reasons to believe that there was a direct nexus between some of these politicians with China. China was actively working to undercut Indian influence by working with these anti-India politicians. All right. So this is where we are supposed to end today's discussion, but we still have 5 minutes. Let me just give you one more point, one more discussion, and then we can stop for today. I'll start with the next module. Basically, I'm continuing with the discussion. All right. Just two more points for the day, and we can close the session for today. So, in the midst of all this crisis, right, even though we were historically good friends, our relations had been affected because of the civil war, the constitution making process, the Madhesi agitation, the blame that India was interfering. All of this had affected our relations. At this point, there was a change in government in India. In 2014, Prime Minister Modi came to power, the Modi government came to power, and Prime Minister Modi tried to reset the relationship. Right? The damage had already happened, but an attempt was made to reset, repair the damage. So when PM Modi came to power in 2014, he invited all the SAARC leaders for his swearing in ceremony. You can see here in this image that I have shared, which shows the swearing in ceremony of PM Modi in the first term in 2014. This was a very unique development in Indian diplomacy because it was a symbolic move. In diplomacy, symbolism holds a lot of value. Symbolic gestures have a lot of value. Prime Minister Modi invited all the SAARC leaders to take part in his swearing in ceremony. You can see Nawaz Sharif, the then Prime Minister of Pakistan. You can see Hamid Karzai, the then President of Afghanistan. Leaders of Maldives, Bhutan, Sri Lanka. You can see Mahinda Rajapaksa as well here. You can see the Prime Minister of Nepal. So all the top leaders were present. All the SAARC leaders were invited. The intention was India was sending a message, a symbolic message. Because the Modi government was launching the neighborhood first policy of India. Under this policy, the government of India said that we are going to prioritize our ties with our neighboring countries. That was the whole focus. See, this was nothing new. It was not entirely a new concept. It existed even before. From many decades, we've always prioritized our neighboring countries in our foreign policy. We've always followed neighborhood first, right? We always give priority to our neighboring relations because any adverse development in our neighborhood affects India. Any economic crisis, political crisis, security crisis in our neighboring countries will of course affect India first. So for many years, we have followed neighborhood first, but now it was being streamlined. It was being streamlined into a focused approach where India was outright saying that we are going to prioritize our relations with all our neighboring countries. So by inviting all SAARC leaders, PM Modi was sending out a message that under the neighborhood first policy, our neighbors will get priority. We will resolve our differences, we'll work together. This was an attempt to repair our relations with our neighbors, especially with Nepal. So PM Modi visited Nepal as well following this. It was one of his first visits, foreign visits, and he even addressed the Nepali parliament. He gave a speech addressing the Nepali parliament. During this visit, he reiterated India's commitment to not interfere in Nepal's internal matters. This is a promise India has been making for many decades. Even former prime ministers have made similar promise. But since the concerns were there, since it was being alleged that India was always meddling and interfering, an open commitment was given by the Prime Minister in the Parliament of Nepal that we are not going to meddle in your internal matters. And we also said we are ready to accept a revision of the 1950 treaty. Because Nepal has few complaints about the treaty. Nepal feels the treaty benefits India because there is always a trade surplus for India. Since Nepal is heavily dependent on India, there is a big trade surplus for India, a trade deficit for Nepal. And also, Nepal feels that because of the treaty, it is strategically bound to India. So, Nepal has always asked for a revision and upgradation of the 1950 treaty. So, PM Modi promised that we are ready to renegotiate the treaty and revise and upgrade. Then we went one step ahead in 2015 when Nepal was hit by a devastating earthquake. There was a massive earthquake in 2015, and India responded by providing disaster management assistance under Operation Maitri. We basically provided HADR support. We conducted humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Indian Army, Indian Air Force, NDRF, Indian Navy, they were all deployed in Nepal to help in search and rescue operations. We provided medicines and essential supplies and aid material to help Nepal overcome the impact of the disaster, right? Because Nepal is very prone to such disasters. The Himalayan belt itself is very prone to earthquakes, landslides, and flooding. So during this earthquake, despite the tensions and differences, India reached out and provided assistance under Operation Maitri. But despite all the measures taken by India, the anti-India sentiments persisted, which derailed our relations with Nepal, especially under leaders like KP Sharma Oli. KP Sharma Oli has been a Nepali nationalist politician. He is someone who has conveniently exploited the anti-India sentiments. KP Oli would become the prime minister as well. He became the prime minister in 2016 once, and he came for a second term in 2019-2020. During these two terms as the prime minister of Nepal, KP Oli would take a pro-China position and an anti-India stand. During this period, from 2016 and again in 2019 to 2020, during these periods, Nepal clearly showed a tilt towards China under KP Oli's leadership. Several anti-India measures were taken where Nepali nationalism was promoted. On nationalist lines, India was blamed for all the problems. Again, allegations were raised that India always meddles, interferes in Nepal, and strong anti-India sentiments were promoted by leaders like KP Oli. He would openly embrace China, and Nepal even joined the Belt and Road Initiative of China, which has been boycotted by India. Later, you'll understand what is Belt and Road Initiative. I'll explain that later. It's a global connectivity infrastructure project that China is pushing in many Asian, African, and European countries. China is planning an ambitious global connectivity project called BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, also called One Belt, One Road project. They both mean the same. So Nepal joined the Belt and Road Initiative, and Chinese investments, Chinese projects went up significantly. And parallelly, we saw the rise in anti-India sentiments and a sudden unnecessary escalation of the border dispute between India and Nepal. So these were the adverse developments that we witnessed in the last few years, which increased tensions between India and Nepal. Essentially, our relations were derailed during these years. Is that clear? So this is where I would like to stop my discussion for today. Tomorrow we'll resume from here. We'll continue the discussion and we'll see what has happened in the last few years. We'll understand a few other important topics, including the border dispute. All right. So I hope you guys have understood everything. Now let's see if there are any questions remaining. And after that, we can end the class for today. Ritika is asking, how does India benefit from its economic relations with Nepal? India also benefits because many Indian companies have big investments in Nepal. Many Indian traders, they have businesses in Nepal. Even our currency, the Indian rupee, right? It is valid in Nepal. And Nepal's rupee, the Nepali currency is tagged, it's pegged to the Indian currency. All right. Even our UPI system, the digital payment system, works in Nepal. So Indian traders, businesses are dependent. We have major investments in Nepal, so we do benefit from this economic relationship. Next, Surya is asking, the open border is a security threat as terrorists can come into India illegally. Yes, there are security challenges. We are going to discuss this tomorrow. It's a very big topic. We'll discuss that tomorrow. I'll explain the challenges, the security challenges along India-Nepal border. We'll discuss that. Don't worry. Neha is asking, sir, Madhesis have cultural links with India. So can we treat them as Indian citizens and give representation in our legislative arena? That can't be done. Madhesis are foreigners at the end of the day, right? They are Nepalis. They can't be given representation in our legislative bodies. That's impossible. They don't get electoral rights. Ashutosh is asking why India supports Madhesis. Because Madhesis are connected to Indian families, right? As I explained, border villages in UP and Bihar, they have familial relations with Madhesi community. They marry into each other. So it becomes a cultural link, a cultural obligation as well on India, a moral cultural obligation to support Madhesis. All right. So guys, these are the questions. Let's end the session for today. Tomorrow we'll resume from here and we'll close Nepal and Bhutan, which will complete our discussion on the Himalayan states, the Himalayan neighboring states of India. I hope it was a good session. Do let me know how it went. Let's catch up tomorrow, 6 a.m. Till then, take care. Have a good day.